A worker, attempting to take a shortcut through a remote part of Isla Carnero. As he pushed his way through the dense vegetation, something unusual caught his eye. Half submerged in the tangled underbrush, barely visible above the stagnant water, lay an old army duffel bag. With a cautious hand, he reached down and unzipped the worn-out bag, but the moment he peeled back the fabric, a wave of sheer horror crashed over him. Without wasting a second, he fumbled for his phone, his fingers trembling as he dialed emergency services. His voice quivered as he relayed what he had just uncovered. Law enforcement swiftly arrived, securing the area and blocking off the site as forensic specialists moved in to examine the contents of the bag. DNA testing later revealed the identity of the victim. The body belonged to Yvonne Baldelli. Dear viewers, please don't forget to like, leave a comment under the video, and subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new videos. This is very important to us. In this true crime case, we will examine the incident involving Yvonne Baldelli, who was born on June 30, 1969, in a quaint and picturesque town nestled in the southern part of California. She was the youngest of 3 children born to Marjorie and James Fold, following her older brother Michael and her sister Michelle. From an early age, Yvonne shared an incredibly strong bond with her siblings, particularly with Michelle, with whom she confided in and sought comfort throughout her life. Their childhood was filled with laughter and companionship, yet it was not without its share of hardships. Tragedy struck the Fold family when Yvonne's mother fell seriously ill. The illness lingered for years, casting a somber shadow over their household. Yvonne, despite her tender age, tried to remain strong, offering whatever little support she could to her mother. However, when Yvonne was just 13, her mother succumbed to the illness, leaving the family shattered and grieving. The pain of losing her mother at such a formative age left a lasting impact on Yvonne, shaping the course of her life in ways she could never have anticipated. Her father, James, attempted to heal from the profound loss and provide a stable home for his children. Just a year after Marjorie's passing, he remarried a kind and compassionate woman who embraced his children as her own. Unlike many tales of bitter step-family dynamics, this union was peaceful, and the children grew close to their stepmother, finding in her a source of warmth and maternal affection. The home gradually regained a semblance of happiness, though the void left by their mother never truly disappeared. Yvonne was determined to build a successful future for herself. She pursued a well-rounded education and dabbled in various career paths, yet her true passion lay in fashion design. She possessed a keen eye for aesthetics, and her dream was to turn her talent into a thriving business. She worked tirelessly to refine her skills, envisioning a future where her designs would be worn by many. Unfortunately, despite her aspirations and relentless effort, she never managed to establish her dream company on a large scale. Yet she remained hopeful, continuously striving to bring her artistic vision to life. While she sought success in her professional life, her personal life was riddled with misfortune. Yvonne entered into marriage twice, hoping each time to find the love and stability she longed for. However, both unions ended in heartbreak, dissolving for reasons that left her feeling betrayed and disillusioned. To add to her sorrow, a medical complication from surgery in her youth left her unable to have children. This devastating reality weighed heavily on her, and though she tried to move past it, the longing to be a mother never truly faded. After her second marriage to Kevin Baldelli ended in divorce in 2007, Yvonne found herself living alone in her cozy apartment. The loneliness was softened only by the presence of her beloved dog, whom she affectionately referred to as her child. She built a life for herself around close family connections, ensuring she remained in touch with her father and sister. Despite the physical distance between them, she made it a priority to visit at least once a month and called them nearly every day, seeking the love and familiarity that had always grounded her. As she approached her 40th birthday in 2009, Yvonne was eager to embrace a new chapter in her life. She yearned for a fresh start, for the companionship that had long eluded her. It was during this time that she met Brian Brimmager, a man who seemed to embody everything she had been searching for. Tall, tanned, and physically fit, Brian exuded charm and confidence. He was charismatic, persuasive, and knew exactly how to captivate a woman's heart. Yet beneath his seemingly perfect exterior, Brian harbored dark secrets. At the time they met, He was still legally married and raising a young son with his wife. Despite his commitment, he was unfaithful, eager to indulge in an affair without regard for the consequences. He spun a web of lies, convincing Yvonne that his marriage was all but over, that he was trapped in an unhappy union solely for the sake of his child. His words struck a chord with Yvonne, who understood the pain of a troubled marriage and the difficulty of breaking free. Believing that his son was the only thing preventing him from leaving, she saw no harm in waiting. She was patient, convinced that love would ultimately prevail. But Yvonne was not the only woman Brian was deceiving. He had honed the art of manipulation, maintaining multiple romantic entanglements simultaneously. In addition to Yvonne, he was secretly involved with another woman, a striking blonde named Christine Verhoeven. Christine was not just another conquest. With her extensive connections and influence, she was a powerful figure, the kind of woman who could shape destinies. When Yvonne discovered the truth, she was devastated. She refused to be just another pawn in Brian's game. Fueled by both heartbreak and determination, she resolved to confront the situation head-on. Gathering her courage, she reached out to Brian's wife, exposing his infidelity not just with herself, but with multiple women. The revelation sent shockwaves through his marriage, forcing Brian into a difficult corner. The scandal escalated, and he was left with no choice but to decide between his crumbling family life and his mistress's. Whether out of true affection or coercion, Brian ultimately chose Yvonne. Within months, he officially divorced his wife and moved in with her. Despite securing the man she had fought for, Yvonne's family remained wary. They sensed something insincere about Brian and questioned his true intentions. But Yvonne, blinded by love, dismissed their concerns. She believed that he was sincere, that their love was real, and that they were destined to be together. As their relationship progressed, Brian began voicing his discontent with his current life. He spoke of drastic changes, of escaping the suffocating routines of city life, of starting anew in a tropical paradise. Yvonne, always willing to support him, embraced the idea wholeheartedly. She saw this as an opportunity to finally build the life she had always wanted, with the man she adored. By September 2011, the decision was final. Yvonne and Brian planned to leave behind their old lives and relocate to the serene island of Carino in Panama. The island, with its pristine beaches and untouched beauty, promised the fresh start they both desired. It was supposed to be their paradise, their escape from the burdens of the past. Before leaving, Yvonne informed her family of her plans. They pleaded with her to reconsider, to think about the risks of leaving everything behind for a man whose loyalty had been questionable at best. But Yvonne was resolute. Love had blinded her to any doubts or fears. She resigned from her job, sold her apartment, and began packing for what she believed would be the beginning of her happily ever after. With the intention of realizing her long-cherished ambition of starting a small business where she could design, create, and sell personalized clothing to tourists visiting the island, Yvonne carefully packed her sewing machine along with a few pieces of clothing and essential supplies. She had envisioned turning her passion for fashion design into a thriving venture that would allow her to live out her dream in paradise. Brian, Yvonne, and her beloved dog eagerly boarded a flight to Panama in early September, filled with hope for their new adventure. After spending a few days exploring the nation's capital and adjusting to the new environment, they embarked on the final leg of their journey by taking a ferry to Carino Island. The island, spanning just 1 square kilometer, was breathtakingly beautiful, surrounded by crystal-clear waters and endless sandy beaches. The couple rented a modest home right by the sea, hoping to settle into a peaceful, idyllic lifestyle. The climate remained consistently hot and humid throughout the year, making it an attractive destination for surfers and divers from around the world. However, the island had a dangerous side. Its interior was covered in dense jungle and perilous swampland teeming with venomous snakes, spiders, and other dangerous creatures. For this reason, nearly all the infrastructure, including bars, shops, and homes, was concentrated along the coastline. Brian, who had been a gifted guitarist since childhood, saw this as an opportunity to reignite his musical passion. He had always dreamed of performing professionally, and now, with the relaxed island atmosphere and numerous beachside bars, he believed he could finally make a name for himself. Within just a week of arriving, He had already made connections with several bar owners. One particularly friendly establishment owner offered him a regular gig playing music in the evenings. While Brian enjoyed the attention and camaraderie of the audience, he quickly developed an unhealthy habit. His admirers would frequently buy him drinks as a token of appreciation, leading him to indulge in alcohol almost every night. Meanwhile, Yvonne was pouring her energy into her new business. However, her dream was slow to take off. Sales were minimal, and despite her best efforts, profits were nearly non-existent. Still, she refused to give up. Determined to make ends meet, she took on additional work at one of the island bars while continuing to build her fashion business. In addition to her job and personal projects, Yvonne adopted another dog she found wandering the island, providing the animal with a loving home. Despite the challenges she faced, she maintained close contact with her sister Michelle Valenzuela, sharing daily updates about her life. But over time, Michelle noticed a change in her sister's messages. They became shorter, less cheerful, and increasingly filled with frustration and sadness. For the first few months, the couple appeared to be living in paradise. Yvonne remained hopeful that Brian would eventually propose to her, envisioning a romantic beachside wedding where they would exchange vows under the golden sun. However, as time passed, Brian made no move toward marriage, and the once passionate relationship began to erode. Their arguments grew more frequent, their connection strained, and Yvonne's fairy tale began to crumble. Michelle became deeply concerned when, at the beginning of December, Yvonne's messages suddenly stopped altogether. Days passed with no word from her, and then, on December 14, 2011, Michelle received an unexpected phone call from Brian. His request stunned her. He wanted to know when he could come pick up his SUV, which had been left in her garage before he and Yvonne moved to Panama. This revelation sent a wave of alarm through Michelle. Brian had returned to the United States. But where was Yvonne? Why hadn't she reached out to her family? When questioned, Brian claimed that he had already explained everything in an email sent a few days earlier. He also insisted that Yvonne had written to Michelle as well, detailing the situation. Confused and anxious, Michelle hurriedly checked her inbox. Sure enough, 2 unread messages awaited her, one from Brian and one from Yvonne. Brian's email stated that Yvonne had left him and run away to Costa Rica with a new lover. The second email, allegedly from Yvonne, mirrored his claims. It explained that she had broken up with Brian after discovering his infidelity and learning that he had fathered a child with another woman. The message went on to say that she had met someone new and had decided to relocate to Costa Rica to start a fresh chapter in her life. At first glance, the explanation seemed plausible. After all, Yvonne had always longed for a stable relationship, and learning that Brian had fathered a child with another woman, especially when she herself could not conceive, might have been devastating for her. However, something about the message didn't sit right with Michelle. Yvonne had never been one to act rashly, and she would have undoubtedly turned to her sister to discuss such a monumental change in her life. Moreover, the tone of the email felt off, subtly different from how Yvonne usually wrote. Michelle's unease deepened as she tried to track her sister's whereabouts. Every attempt to obtain information about Yvonne's current location led to a dead end. The more she searched, the more suspicious the circumstances surrounding her disappearance became. There was a disturbing lack of response to phone calls, and the messages that did arrive from Yvonne were increasingly cold and distant. They contained only brief statements such as, "I'm okay, I need some time, and I'm not ready to talk about this." Michelle, growing more anxious with each passing day, urged Brian to accompany her to the police station to file a missing persons report. Though visibly uneasy, Brian dismissed her concerns, insisting it wasn't necessary. He assured her that Yvonne was fine, perfectly capable of taking care of herself, and that she would return on her own terms when she was ready. Despite Brian's reluctance to discuss Yvonne's disappearance and his hurried departure after collecting his car, Michelle felt a small sense of relief when a text message arrived from Yvonne's phone, stating she would be coming home for their father's birthday in January. Deciding to trust the message, Michelle chose to wait a few more weeks, holding on to the hope that her sister would return as promised. However, as mid-January arrived and Yvonne had neither returned nor sent any further messages or calls, Michelle's concern turned into full-blown fear. Suspicion deepened when she discovered that Brian had married Christine Verhoeven, the mother of his child, just before the holidays. It seemed incredibly suspicious that he had moved on so quickly, considering that he and Yvonne had supposedly broken up only weeks prior. The entire situation felt orchestrated and unnatural. Desperate for answers and increasingly convinced that Yvonne had never gone to Costa Rica as Brian claimed, Michelle took the next logical step. She formally reported her sister as missing to law enforcement. Once the case was escalated, an official investigation was launched. Authorities reached out to Panama, and the inquiry soon confirmed Michelle's worst fears. There was no evidence that Yvonne Baldelli had ever left the country. Her passport had not been used for any outbound travel, and there were no records of her crossing any border. Driven by a gnawing sense of dread, Michelle enlisted the help of her cousin, a skilled programmer, to trace the IP address of the suspicious emails supposedly sent by Yvonne. The findings were damning. The messages, which were meant to create the illusion that Yvonne was safe and had willingly left, were not sent from some remote location in Costa Rica. Instead, they were traced back to Dana Point, California, where Brian Brimmiger was living at the time. Moreover, an additional email sent by Brian originated from the same IP address, further solidifying the deception. Realizing the severity of the situation, Michelle immediately handed this crucial evidence over to the police. Her concerns deepened as she pieced together a sinister timeline. Brian had continued to impersonate Yvonne in emails and text messages for nearly a month, keeping up the facade that she was still alive and traveling. Despite the alarming nature of Michelle's discoveries, there was not yet enough concrete evidence to warrant Brian's arrest. Investigators were left with no choice but to continue gathering information and keeping a close watch on him. Meanwhile, more disturbing revelations surfaced. It was confirmed that while Brian was still living in Panama with Yvonne, he had already proposed to Christine Verhoeven. Christine, completely unaware that Brian was cohabiting with another woman, had accepted his proposal, believing that he had been away on business. Determined to take matters into her own hands, Michelle flew to Panama herself 2 months after her sister's disappearance. Once there, she sought out Don Winter, a former American intelligence officer turned private investigator who specialized in locating missing Americans abroad. She recounted every detail of Yvonne's story to Winter, including Brian's suspicious behavior and the misleading emails. Winter, with years of experience in high-stakes cases, immediately sensed that the situation was dire. Based on his professional judgment, he feared that Yvonne had likely met a grim fate. Winter used his deep network of connections to pressure Panamanian authorities into taking swift action. He also leveraged his expertise in high-profile cases to bring international attention to Yvonne's disappearance, turning it into a major news story. The media's coverage gained traction, with news outlets across the world reporting on the case of the missing American woman in Panama. In a desperate bid for answers, Yvonne's family members held a press conference to plead for information and assistance. As the investigation intensified, Yvonne's brother, father, stepmother, and several close family members and friends traveled to Panama to join the search efforts. They made their way to the remote island of Carino, where Yvonne and Brian had lived, and began an exhaustive search. The dense jungle, treacherous swamps, and overgrown wilderness made their efforts painstakingly difficult. Despite their persistence, they found no trace of Yvonne. Frustrated but determined, they turned to the island's residents, hoping to uncover any leads that could shed light on what had happened. What they learned was unsettling. According to locals, Yvonne and Brian had been regularly seen at various bars, frequently drinking to excess. Their arguments had become notorious, with the couple engaging in heated disputes in public, often ignoring those around them. Witnesses described intense drunken fights that escalated into shouting matches, with Yvonne at times appearing visibly distressed. It was clear that their once romantic dream of living in paradise had turned into something much darker, a volatile and possibly dangerous situation. In addition to the troubling revelations about Yvonne's sudden disappearance, people in her social circle and community began to take greater notice of the visible bruises and scrapes that marred her face and torso. Her usual lively and radiant expression had been replaced with a quiet, guarded demeanor, and she rarely appeared in public without wearing sunglasses, even in the evening or on overcast days. It was as though she were attempting to hide the damage behind her eyes, shielding herself from scrutiny while carrying an invisible weight of fear and secrecy. Neighbors of the house where she had lived reported unsettling occurrences to the property owner, claiming that loud, aggressive arguments frequently broke out within its walls. On multiple occasions, They overheard the sounds of shouting, objects being smashed, and profanities being hurled, often escalating into what sounded like physical altercations. These reports only reinforced suspicions that something terrible had happened behind closed doors. Meanwhile, law enforcement intensified their efforts, deploying a team of specialized divers to search the waters surrounding the remote island for any trace of Yvonne's remains or belongings that might provide a clue to her fate. Yet despite exhaustive searches, their efforts yielded nothing. No body, no personal effects, no clear signs of what had transpired. From the very beginning, Brian Brimmiger was considered the primary suspect in the case. His behavior and Yvonne's history of injuries cast a dark shadow over him. But there was a critical problem. There was no direct evidence tying him to a crime. Without a body or clear proof of foul play, authorities were unable to charge him with anything more than suspicion. Brian stuck to his narrative without deviation, insisting that Yvonne had left of her own accord after discovering that he had fathered a child with another woman. He claimed that she had simply vanished, possibly to start a new life elsewhere. But investigators found his story difficult to believe. It was only on September 21, 2012, that a search was conducted at his home. At the time of his search, Brian was unemployed and spent most of his days at home, looking after his child and indulging in his passion for golf. His wife, Christine, was the sole breadwinner, working long hours while he remained at home. Initially, Brian appeared composed and confident, repeating the same version of events he had given before. He was adamant that Yvonne had made the decision to leave him and had cut off all communication as a result. However, cracks began to show in his facade when law enforcement revealed that the last communication sent in Yvonne's name had originated from his neighborhood. He grew noticeably anxious when officers discovered her laptop, which contained crucial digital evidence that contradicted his claims. A forensic analysis of Yvonne's laptop uncovered several alarming discoveries. Not only were messages sent in her name after her supposed disappearance, but investigators also found a photograph of her with a visible bruise beneath her eye. Additionally, a screenshot of a conversation from November showed a discussion between Brian and Christine about their affair and the child they shared. Potentially the very means by which Yvonne discovered his deception. Even more damning was the laptop's search history from November 26, 2011. Investigators found incriminating searches such as how to clean blood and how to remove blood from a mattress. Though these searches suggested an attempt to cover up a violent act, there were still no definitive signs of Yvonne's body or blood-stained evidence that could link Brian directly to a crime. While these findings raised strong suspicions, they were still largely circumstantial. The fact that Brian had been impersonating Yvonne in her messages did not, on its own, prove that he had killed her. However, the mounting evidence continued to paint an increasingly sinister picture. A breakthrough came when Don Winter, an independent investigator assisting in the case, uncovered an alarming detail. Brian had sold a machete before leaving Panama. Disturbingly, in an online chat with a prospective buyer, Brian had made a horrifying joke, claiming that he had only used the machete once to finish off a stripper. The remark was so grotesque and chilling that it prompted authorities to track down the new owner of the machete. Although forensic tests on the blade initially yielded no conclusive evidence, the nature of the joke suggested a disturbing level of callousness and possible intent. Another key aspect of the case was Brian's use of Yvonne's bank card to fabricate the illusion that she had fled to another country. To strengthen his alibi, Brian deliberately traveled to Costa Rica before returning to the United States, making strategic withdrawals from ATMs along the way. He used the missing woman's card to make several transactions in San Jose, ensuring that her financial trail suggested she had willingly left Panama. To further erase his tracks, he purchased his own travel tickets in cash and eventually disposed of the bank card entirely after emptying the funds. What Brian failed to anticipate, however, was the presence of security cameras. Footage from multiple ATMs in Costa Rica captured him using Yvonne's card, concrete proof that he had been fraudulently accessing her finances long after her alleged departure. Despite the mounting circumstantial evidence, the lack of a body remained a significant obstacle in charging Brian with murder. On July 2013, nearly a year and a half after Yvonne's disappearance, authorities finally arrested Brian Brimmiger. However, due to the absence of a clear cause of death or physical remains, he was initially charged only with fabricating statements and obstructing the investigation. By this time, his relationship with Christine had progressed, and the couple had welcomed their second child together, a baby boy born just a week before his arrest. Even when confronted with overwhelming inconsistencies in his alibi and given the opportunity to confess, Brian remained steadfast in denying any involvement in Yvonne's disappearance. His lawyer continuously emphasized the lack of a body and direct evidence, arguing that while Brian may have misled authorities, there was no concrete proof that Yvonne was dead or that Brian had played a role in her presumed demise. Then, 2 months after Brian's arrest, a shocking and significant breakthrough occurred in the case. A worker taking a shortcut through a remote part of Isla Carnero inadvertently stumbled into a marshy thicket and made a grisly discovery. Half submerged in the underbrush, barely visible above the water, was an old army duffel bag. The fabric was partially decayed from prolonged exposure to the elements. As the worker cautiously approached, a horrifying realization set in. This was no ordinary discarded bag. Driven by a natural curiosity, the man reached down and unzipped the weathered backpack, hoping to uncover something of value. Perhaps money, jewelry, or an item that might be useful. However, as he peeled back the fabric, his breath hitched in horror. His hands trembled as he recoiled, his stomach twisting with nausea. Without hesitation, he scrambled for his phone and alerted the authorities, his voice shaking as he relayed the shocking discovery. Law enforcement quickly arrived at the scene, sealing off the area as forensic teams moved in to inspect the bag. Inside, they uncovered human remains, gruesomely packed and abandoned in a location carefully chosen to ensure they would never be found. DNA testing later confirmed that the remains belonged to Yvonne Baldelli. The forensic pathologist's findings painted a horrifying picture of her final moments. She had been subjected to severe and repeated beatings before her death, as evidenced by a fractured cheekbone, a broken nose, and multiple missing teeth. The brutality of the assault suggested prolonged suffering before her life was ultimately taken. Furthermore, it became clear that her cherished dogs had likely been murdered to perpetuate the false narrative of her voluntary disappearance. A critical breakthrough in the case came when forensic specialists analyzed the chop marks on her bones, which bore the distinct signature of a machete blade. Each blade unique, akin to a fingerprint. This damning piece of evidence irrefutably linked the crime to a specific weapon. With this forensic proof, authorities formally charged Brian Brimmager with murder and obstruction of justice. As the case against Brian progressed, tragedy struck Yvonne's family once more. At the start of 2014, Michelle Valenzuela, Yvonne's devoted sister, was diagnosed with an advanced and aggressive form of cancer. She had spent so much time consumed by the search for justice that she had neglected her own health, postponing doctor visits and ignoring warning signs. By the time she finally sought medical attention, it was too late. Her illness had reached a terminal stage. Doctors offered her intense treatments, but after 6 months of painful and ultimately ineffective therapy, Michelle made a resolute decision. Rather than spend her remaining time in a hospital bed, she chose to dedicate her final months to ensuring her sister's murderer faced justice. Despite her declining health, Michelle fought relentlessly, advocating for Yvonne in every way possible. In September 2014, doctors delivered a devastating prognosis. She had only weeks left to live. Yet, even with death looming over her, she refused to give up. Determined to see Brian face the full consequences of his actions, she chose to testify in court, recounting the horrors of her sister's case with unwavering resolve. She presented the court with every email, every text message, and every shred of evidence she had gathered over the years. After delivering her powerful testimony, she collapsed from exhaustion. 3 days later, Michelle passed away, leaving behind a legacy of unwavering courage and devotion. The prosecution presented a chilling reconstruction of the events leading up to Yvonne's death. On the night of November 26th, tensions between Brian and Yvonne reached a boiling point. After discovering more incriminating messages between Brian and Christine, Yvonne confronted him, igniting a violent argument. Intoxicated and consumed by rage, Brian launched a brutal attack, delivering fatal stab wounds to her body. He then carried out the unthinkable. He methodically killed her in the bathtub using a machete, killed her beloved dogs, and packed her remains into his military backpack. Determined to erase all traces of his crime, He disposed of the blood-stained mattress and the limbs that wouldn't fit in the bag by hurling them off a rocky cliff and into the ocean. Under the cover of night, he trekked deep into the swamps of the island and abandoned the backpack, confident that nature would conceal his crime forever. In the following weeks, Brian maintained a chilling facade of normalcy. He continued living in the same beach house, meticulously destroying any remaining evidence. He spun a web of lies, telling the islanders that Yvonne had impulsively left him for another man, painting himself as the heartbroken victim. His deception was so convincing that he even managed to attract a new girlfriend, Nicole Powell, who comforted him in the weeks leading up to his departure from Panama. However, Nicole would later become a key witness in Brian's trial. She bravely testified against him, exposing his violent tendencies and pathological dishonesty. When confronted with overwhelming forensic evidence, Brian was left with no choice but to admit partial responsibility. However, in a last-ditch effort to evade full accountability, he claimed self-defense. He insisted that Yvonne had attacked him first with a knife and that he had only acted to protect himself. He feigned memory loss regarding the brutal dismemberment, the murder of the dogs, and the systematic destruction of evidence, conveniently attributing his actions to shock-induced amnesia. But his fabricated defense crumbled under scrutiny. Investigators uncovered damning internet searches and calculated attempts to erase digital evidence, proving that Brian had methodically planned his cover-up. In the spring of 2016, Brian Brimmiger was convicted, not of first-degree murder, as Yvonne's grieving family had hoped, but of manslaughter. Instead, he received a 26-year prison sentence with the possibility of parole in 2035. Everything seemed normal, just another ordinary day, but one phone call to the police changed everything. A body was discovered approximately 12 miles away, lying at the base of an embankment near the highway. Whoever had left the body there hadn't made any attempt to conceal it. It was as if the killer had simply driven up, dumped the body, and left without a second thought. The medical examination revealed chilling details about Rebekah's final moments. She had suffered multiple blunt force injuries to the head, suggesting a brutal attack with a heavy object. But the ultimate cause of death was strangulation. In this documentary film, we will examine a real case that happened to Rebekah Gould. She was born on April 28, 1982, in the small, picturesque town of Melbourne, Arkansas. Nestled in the heart of Izard County, Melbourne was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. A quiet and close-knit community where people felt safe leaving their doors unlocked at night. Rebekah grew up with 3 sisters, forming an inseparable bond with them as they navigated the trials of childhood together. However, their family was shaken when their parents divorced shortly after the youngest sister was born. The separation was difficult for all of them, leaving the girls struggling to adjust to the sudden changes in their lives. Despite the emotional toll, they remained resilient, finding strength in their sisterhood. They stayed with their mother, though their father remained a presence in their lives. Though it took time, the divorce ultimately brought them closer together. They became each other's greatest support system, always watching out for one another, sharing secrets, dreams, and hardships. The Gould sisters were known for their tight-knit relationship, and no matter how challenging life became, they always found a way to laugh together. After finishing high school, Rebekah was determined to further her education. She enrolled at Northwest Arkansas Community College and moved to Fayetteville, a vibrant city that offered more opportunities than her small hometown. One of her sisters was already studying there, which made the transition easier, and the two saw each other almost every day. Being away from home wasn't always easy, but knowing her sister was close by made everything feel a little less lonely. Rebekah and her sisters frequently visited their family in Melbourne, making the short 25-mile trip whenever they could, though balancing studies and family time was sometimes a challenge. By September 2004, 22-year-old Rebekah was on the cusp of significant change. She had spent the last few months considering transferring to the University of Arkansas, eager to expand her horizons and further her education. Finally, the opportunity presented itself, and she planned to make the switch. However, before beginning a new chapter at a bigger university, she decided to complete one more semester at her current college. It was an exciting yet bittersweet decision, as she would be leaving behind familiar faces and routines. As the start of the semester approached, Rebekah and her sister made plans to return home for the weekend, eager to spend time with their family before their schedules became too hectic again. Rebekah had another reason for heading back to Melbourne. Her boyfriend Casey lived in a nearby town, and she was looking forward to seeing him. Her plan was simple: enjoy some quality time with her family, visit Casey, and then return to college feeling refreshed and ready for the new semester. On Sunday, September 19, Rebekah and her sister drove home, excited for a short break from their studies. They spent the day catching up with loved ones, sharing meals, and laughing over stories. As the evening approached, Rebekah left to visit Casey, who was working that night. She planned to stay at his house and meet up with her sister the following morning to drive back to college together. However, when morning came, Rebekah didn't show up at the agreed-upon time. Her sister tried calling her several times, but each call went unanswered. At first, the family wasn't overly concerned. Rebekah was a young adult, and they figured she might have overslept or gotten caught up in last-minute plans with friends. Maybe she had decided to spend a little extra time with Casey before returning to Fayetteville. But as the hours stretched on without any sign of her, their initial calm turned into unease. If Rebekah had decided to stay another night, she would have at least called or texted someone. The silence was unsettling. By Tuesday, the concern had turned into full-blown panic. Rebekah had not reached out to anyone. Not her sister, not her friends, not even her mother. No one had seen or heard from her in over 24 hours. Her mother, unable to shake the growing sense of dread, contacted the police. Authorities began investigating immediately, retracing Rebekah's last known movements. They discovered that she had indeed stayed with Casey the night before her disappearance. Officers visited Casey at his workplace to question him about what had happened. Casey told police that the last time he saw Rebekah was on Monday morning around 8:30 a.m., when she dropped him off at the cafe where he worked. According to him, Rebekah planned to return to his house, gather her belongings, and then meet up with her sister before heading back to college. He also mentioned that she had promised to pick him up from work later that day, but she never showed. Initially, he had assumed she had gotten busy or changed her plans, but when she failed to appear, he spent the evening with friends at a party, not realizing anything was amiss. Upon hearing Casey's account, the police requested permission to search his home, which he granted. What they found inside was deeply unsettling. Rebekah's car was still parked outside, a red flag in itself. Inside the house, they found her purse, complete with her identification, along with her beloved dog, both things she would never have willingly left behind. Even more troubling, her small suitcase, which Casey said she had packed with some clothes, was missing. As officers continued their search, they noticed something disturbing. The mattress on the bed was bare, and instead of lying flat, it seemed unevenly placed. When they lifted it, they discovered large, ominous red stains that bore a chilling resemblance to blood. As they inspected the rest of the house, more unsettling discoveries emerged. Bloodstains were found on the floor and even smeared on the wallpaper. Inside the washing machine, officers found bedding soaked with blood. Several bottles of bleach were found nearby, indicating that someone had made a hasty attempt to clean up the evidence. The implications were horrifying. Every clue pointed to the worst possible conclusion. Something terrible had happened to Rebekah inside that house, and she might no longer be alive. The absence of her body only deepened the mystery. Though the investigators had not yet found definitive proof linking the blood to Rebekah, it was only a matter of time before DNA analysis would confirm their suspicions. While forensic experts meticulously examined every inch of the house, detectives intensified their interrogation of Rebekah's boyfriend, Casey. Given that he was possibly the last person to see her alive, and that a significant amount of blood had been discovered in his residence, he was a key person of interest in the investigation. However, Casey adamantly denied any involvement in Rebekah's disappearance. According to his statement, the last time he saw her was the previous morning, and she had not contacted him since. He insisted that he had spent the night with friends, returning home briefly to change clothes before heading to work for his next shift. Despite the overwhelming physical evidence, Casey maintained that he had not noticed any blood splatters on the floor or walls and had not smelled bleach. Furthermore, he claimed he did not find it odd that Rebekah's car was still parked outside his house, or that some of her belongings remained in his room. The police, however, were not quick to accept his version of events. Although they had no substantial evidence at that moment to charge him with murder, They were determined to uncover the truth. To verify his alibi, detectives interviewed all of Casey's friends with whom he claimed to have spent Monday night. They corroborated his statement, asserting that he was with them until early the following morning. This provided Casey with a solid alibi, forcing the police to widen their search for other potential suspects. Despite their efforts, they still had no clear picture of what had happened to Rebekah or at what exact moment she had vanished. The only certainty was that she had not answered any calls since the morning of the previous day. During further questioning, Casey suggested that investigators should look into Rebekah's ex-boyfriend, a man named Justin. This tip prompted authorities to reach out to Justin, but he was nowhere to be found and did not respond to phone calls. The coincidence of his sudden unavailability at the same time as Rebekah's disappearance raised red flags. However, 2 days later, Justin resurfaced and contacted the police himself. He explained that he had been out of town at a casino with his father. Investigators were able to confirm his alibi, as surveillance footage and casino records placed him miles away from the crime scene, effectively ruling him out as a suspect. As detectives worked tirelessly to piece together Rebekah's final hours, they uncovered a crucial lead. Surveillance footage and witness accounts revealed that Rebekah had stopped at a gas station near Casey's workplace on the morning of her disappearance. She purchased a breakfast sandwich before heading toward Casey's house. Employees at the station recognized her from photos, confirming that she had been there sometime after 8:30 a.m. This timeline aligned with Casey's account of events, adding further complexity to the case. Investigators later found the same sandwich in Casey's house, untouched. This indicated that Rebekah had indeed returned home, but something had happened to her before she had the chance to eat. Given that Casey was at work at that time, this cast doubt on his direct involvement. However, authorities could not rule out the possibility that he was involved in some capacity. The investigation took a critical turn when forensic analysis confirmed that the blood found in Casey's house was a match for Rebekah's. Additionally, experts found no traces of foreign DNA in the samples. This only deepened the mystery. If Casey wasn't present when she was attacked, then who was? Detectives expanded their inquiry, questioning all of Rebekah's friends and relatives. They worked on the theory that if Rebekah had been attacked, it was likely someone she knew, someone with a personal motive. Police also scrutinized all of Casey's acquaintances who had access to his home, but this avenue of inquiry yielded no significant leads. For days, investigators faced a frustrating standstill until a breakthrough came on September 27th, 1 week after Rebekah's disappearance. Her body was discovered approximately 12 miles from Casey's house at the base of an embankment near the highway. The location was secluded, not visible from the road, making it unlikely that anyone would have stumbled upon it by chance. Whoever had disposed of the body had not made any effort to conceal it. There was no sign of a shallow grave or any attempt to cover her with debris. The perpetrator had seemingly driven to the location, dumped her, and left. A medical examination revealed harrowing details about Rebekah's final moments. She had sustained multiple blows to the head with a heavy object, but the ultimate cause of death was strangulation. The lack of defensive wounds suggested that she had been taken by surprise, incapacitated before she had a chance to fight back. Experts estimated that her body had been at the site for roughly a week, though they were unable to pinpoint a more precise time of death. While processing the crime scene, investigators identified a potential murder weapon. A piano in Casey's house was missing one of its legs, a thick, solid piece of wood with enough weight to inflict serious injury. The shape of the missing leg matched the pattern of trauma found on Rebekah's skull. When questioned, Casey admitted that the leg had been loose for some time and could have been easily removed. However, the police failed to locate the missing piano leg, despite an extensive search of Casey's house, the surrounding area, and even the location where Rebekah's body was discovered. The complete absence of this potential murder weapon only deepened the mystery. With no physical evidence linking a suspect to the crime, detectives turned their attention toward identifying possible motives that could have led to such a brutal act. One of the first theories detectives ruled out was a robbery gone wrong. Nothing had been stolen from the house. Rebekah's purse, identification, and even her personal belongings were still there. The only missing items were Rebekah's suitcase and the piano leg, neither of which suggested a financial motive. Additionally, the absence of signs of sexual led investigators to believe that this was a targeted killing. Someone had wanted Rebekah dead, and they had acted with enough preparation to minimize the chances of getting caught. Another disturbing possibility arose. Was the perpetrator someone Rebekah knew? Since there were no signs of forced entry, police believed she might have willingly let the killer inside. Given that she was attacked almost immediately after returning to Casey's house, it was possible that the killer had been watching her, aware of her schedule and Casey's absence that morning. Investigators speculated that the murderer had lingered in the house for several hours, attempting to scrub away any evidence using bleach before transporting Rebekah's body to the embankment where it was later found. Despite these working theories, detectives faced a significant roadblock. There was virtually no evidence. Without physical proof, a suspect, or even a strong motive, the case stalled. Over the following months, they expanded their investigation, looking into hundreds of possible suspects, including Casey's friends, Rebekah's acquaintances, and even strangers who lived in nearby towns. Investigators followed countless leads, but none brought them closer to solving the case. They received a flood of tips from locals, yet many of these were based on speculation rather than facts, resulting in dead ends. As time passed, the case grew colder. Several years later, it was reopened multiple times, with new teams of detectives taking a fresh look at the evidence. Yet every attempt to reignite the investigation resulted in the same frustrating conclusion. Without a clear motive or concrete evidence, identifying the perpetrator remained impossible. The lack of answers surrounding Rebekah's murder eventually captured national attention, drawing in amateur sleuths and true crime enthusiasts who hoped to piece together the puzzle. One journalist, George Jared, had been following the case since its inception. Passionate about uncovering the truth, he dedicated years to researching the crime, publishing articles, and even writing a book detailing the investigation. As the case gained traction in the true crime community, Jared launched a podcast discussing its many mysteries. During his research, he connected with Jennifer Buchholz, a former counterintelligence officer in the U.S. Army who had developed an interest in the case. Recognizing their shared determination, the two decided to collaborate. They created a Facebook group dedicated to discussing Rebekah's murder, where they engaged with thousands of followers who shared theories, analyzed evidence, and debated potential suspects. In the early months of the group's activity, one particular subscriber stood out: William Miller. He piqued their curiosity for two reasons. Firstly, Miller lived in the Philippines, making his deep interest in an unsolved crime from a small town in Arkansas seem unusual. Secondly, he was highly active in discussions, frequently commenting on posts, engaging with other members, and even messaging Jared and Buchholz directly. Miller expressed a strong desire to help solve the case, often suggesting theories and pointing out details that had gone unnoticed by others. He exhibited an extensive knowledge of the crime scene, including obscure information about the area where Rebekah's body was found, details that had never been widely publicized. As time passed, George and Jennifer grew increasingly suspicious of Miller's behavior. They chose to remain discreet about their concerns, carefully monitoring his activity to avoid alarming him. Then, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One of the group's members, an expert in genealogy, conducted a simple background search on Miller. What she discovered sent shockwaves through the group. Miller was not just a curious outsider, he was Casey's cousin. This revelation raised serious questions. Why had Miller been so invested in this case for years, despite living thousands of miles away? Why had he kept his family connection hidden? Determined to get answers, Jared and Buchholz contacted the police, presenting their suspicions and the new information they had uncovered. Investigators reviewed their findings and were stunned to realize that Miller's name had been in the original case files from 2004. As it turned out, William Miller had been in town around the time of Rebekah's murder. Miller had already been questioned during the initial investigation, stating that he had traveled from Texas to help another relative. He admitted to visiting Casey twice, 2 days before Rebekah's disappearance, and then again the following day. During his second visit, he claimed he hadn't even entered the house. Instead, Rebekah had spotted him standing outside through the window and informed Casey that someone was loitering near the property. Casey stepped outside, spoke with his cousin for about 15 minutes, and then Miller left. At the time, his presence had not raised any suspicion, but now, with new evidence coming to light, detectives were taking a much deeper interest in him. As they dug deeper into Miller's background, they uncovered a troubling history. He had been a suspect in multiple cases over the years, including an assault charge in 2002 involving a minor. Later, he was arrested for breaking into his ex-wife's home and attacking her. Despite the severity of these crimes, Miller never faced serious legal consequences. Eventually, he relocated to the Philippines, where he started a new life, marrying, having children, and working on offshore oil rigs. Detectives were eager to question him again, but with Miller living overseas, bringing him in was nearly impossible. He was also unresponsive to attempts at contact. The police had no choice but to wait for him to return to the United States. This finally happened in 2020 when customs officials notified authorities that Miller had re-entered the country and traveled to Oregon, where his mother lived. Detectives called his mother in an attempt to locate him, but she claimed she had not seen her son in a long time. However, detectives knew she was lying. Miller was in town, and they needed to act fast. Realizing that they had no direct evidence linking him to the crime, the police formulated a strategy. If Miller was indeed involved in Rebekah's murder, they needed to find a way to extract a confession. Detective Mike McNeil, who was leading the investigation, took a calculated approach. Instead of immediately confronting Miller with accusations, he casually explained that they were conducting follow-up interviews with everyone involved in the case. Miller, appearing cooperative, agreed to speak and insisted he had nothing to hide. Then, McNeil suggested something unexpected. He asked Miller if he would be willing to take a polygraph test. Surprisingly, Miller agreed. He then traveled back to Arkansas for what he thought would be a routine follow-up. Upon arrival, Detective McNeil pretended to call the local police chief, inquiring whether a polygraph specialist happened to be available. Miller, unaware that this was part of a strategy, immediately became visibly nervous and attempted to steer the conversation in another direction. Meanwhile, the detective continued the charade, stepping away as if making arrangements. A few moments later, he returned and informed Miller that, by pure luck, a polygraph expert could arrive in just 30 minutes. In reality, the specialist was already waiting in the next room. Although polygraphs remain a subject of intense debate and are widely regarded as unreliable, their results deemed inadmissible in court, the detectives had no real interest in the test itself. Their true objective was psychological. They wanted to unsettle Miller, to push him into a state of heightened anxiety where his carefully constructed composure might begin to fracture. By subjecting him to the test, they sought to exploit his nerves, to make him question his own ability to keep his secrets buried. Miller, visibly uneasy, hesitated before reluctantly asking whether polygraph results could be used as concrete evidence against him in court. Detective McNeil, sensing the opportunity, responded ambiguously, crafting his words carefully to maintain an air of authority without outright lying. "In some cases, they can be," he said, deliberately avoiding mention of how infrequent or insignificant such cases were. His evasiveness had the desired effect. Miller's apprehension deepened. Though uncertainty gripped him, he ultimately consented to take the test, unable to find a way to refuse without raising further suspicion. As expected, Miller failed spectacularly. The polygraph examiner, following standard protocol, concluded that Miller had been deceptive in answering all critical questions, particularly those concerning his connection to Rebekah's murder. His responses betrayed him, his body's involuntary reactions exposing the guilt he had tried so hard to suppress. The detectives had been waiting for this moment. Watching Miller's anxiety spike, McNeil pressed forward without hesitation. His voice calm but firm, he delivered the next blow. Forensic analysts, he claimed, had recently re-examined evidence from the original investigation and had discovered traces of Rebekah's DNA in samples taken from Miller's car. In reality, no such forensic findings existed. The police had never collected or tested any DNA from Miller's vehicle back in 2004. It was a calculated deception, a legal but ethically dubious interrogation tactic designed to push a suspect over the edge. Miller's reaction was instantaneous. His expression changed, his breath hitched, and a wave of panic flickered across his face. He sat motionless for several seconds, his mind racing through the implications. McNeil seized the advantage, driving the point home with relentless insistence. "We have the proof," he said with certainty. "You're caught. The only thing left for you to do is tell the truth." The psychological weight of the moment was crushing. Miller's defenses, already battered by the interrogation, began to crumble. His fingers twitched against the metal armrests of his chair. His knee bounced erratically. The silence in the room stretched, thick and suffocating, before he finally spoke, but not with an outright confession. Instead, he grasped at a desperate, implausible story. "I didn't kill her," he blurted out. His voice was shaky but determined, clinging to a sliver of hope that the detectives might believe him. "I swear. That morning I went to Casey's house, and when I walked in, she was already dead. There was someone else there, some guy wearing a mask. He must have done it." McNeil didn't buy it for a second. His stare bore into Miller, unblinking, his silence heavy with accusation. Then, something unexpected happened. Miller inhaled sharply, then held his breath. His fingers clenched into fists before slowly relaxing. He looked directly at McNeil, his eyes dark and unreadable. Another beat of silence passed, stretching into an eternity, before he finally exhaled and uttered the words the detectives had been waiting for. "I'm just going to tell you. I did it. I'm sorry for what I did." According to Miller, that morning, he had set out on a hunting trip in the dense woods near his cousin Casey's house. He was familiar with the terrain, having spent years in the area during his school days. However, as he roamed the forest, a thought suddenly struck him. Casey's girlfriend Rebekah was at the house. For reasons he could not fully explain, he felt an urge to speak with her. It was an inexplicable compulsion that soon escalated into something far more sinister. Miller knocked on the door, fabricating a pretext to enter. He told Rebekah that he needed to use the phone, and she, unsuspecting of any ill intent, let him in without hesitation. While pretending to make a call, Miller began pacing the living room, his mind racing. Meanwhile, Rebekah had returned to the bedroom, unaware of the violent thoughts boiling beneath the surface of Miller's seemingly calm demeanor. He later claimed that he was suddenly overwhelmed by a violent, uncontrollable rage. A dark impulse took hold of him, an irrepressible need to kill. Spotting a piano leg nearby, he seized it without a second thought and made his way toward the bedroom. Rebekah was lying on the bed, oblivious to the imminent danger. In an instant, he swung the heavy wooden object down upon her head, striking her multiple times with brutal force. When she stopped moving, Miller, in a final act of calculated cruelty, wrapped his hands around her throat and strangled her until he was certain she was dead. Once the heinous act was complete, Miller wasted no time. He wrapped Rebekah's lifeless body in a bedsheet, carried her outside, and placed her in the back of his pickup truck. Determined to erase any evidence of the crime, he scoured the house, frantically scrubbing the floor, walls, and bedding with bleach in an attempt to eliminate the bloodstains. After cleaning as much as he could, Miller drove to the highway and found a secluded embankment. Under the cover of darkness, he disposed of the body, leaving it to decay beneath the trees, hidden from passing motorists. Following his confession, the detective pressed Miller for a motive. What could have driven him to commit such a senseless murder? Miller's response was chilling. He claimed he had simply felt the overwhelming urge to kill Rebekah, with no logical reason or provocation. He insisted that he could not control himself, that the impulse had consumed him entirely. However, at the conclusion of the interrogation, he expressed remorse, stating that he had lived with guilt for years and now had to take responsibility for his actions. Miller was promptly arrested and extradited to Arkansas, where the case was to be prosecuted. But, in an unexpected twist, once he arrived, he abruptly retracted his confession and claimed he was innocent. This sudden reversal threatened to unravel the entire case. As by law, a confession needed to be made in front of a judge, particularly in situations where there was no physical evidence linking the suspect to the crime. Complicating matters further was a procedural error during Miller's arrest. The officer responsible for reading him his rights had been interrupted by Miller's questions, resulting in the Miranda warning being left incomplete. This technicality could have rendered his confession inadmissible in court, potentially setting him free. However, the judge ruled that the recorded confession would still be considered valid. Miller's opportunity to commit the crime, his intimate knowledge of Casey's work schedule, and his detailed account, which matched the crime scene perfectly, were deemed sufficient evidence to proceed. It is also worth noting that Miller had an easy route to escape justice. When police first contacted him in Oregon for questioning, he could have refused to cooperate and simply walked out of the station. Given that there was no concrete evidence against him, He could have easily boarded a flight back to the Philippines, permanently avoiding extradition. Without tangible proof, authorities would have had no legal means to bring him back, and the case would have gone unsolved forever. But Detective McNeil had a strong suspicion that Miller had an underlying desire to confess. His obsessive engagement in the online true crime group, where he frequently commented and interacted with investigators, strongly suggested that he wanted to be noticed. If Miller had truly wanted to keep his involvement hidden, the logical course of action would have been to stay silent and avoid drawing attention to himself. Instead, he had actively inserted himself into discussions about the case, a behavior often observed in individuals who subconsciously want their crimes to be uncovered. Perhaps his decision to remain in the interrogation room without requesting a lawyer was part of this same internal struggle. He simply could not continue living under the weight of his guilt. Eventually, despite his brief attempt to retract his confession, Miller changed his mind yet again. He ultimately struck a plea deal with the prosecution, bringing some form of closure to the case. However, what followed next sent shockwaves through the investigation. While serving time behind bars, Miller made a horrifying revelation. Rebekah was not his only victim. In a chilling admission, he confessed to murdering 5 other women throughout his life. The most disturbing part? He could not even remember their names. According to his new account, he would lure women into his car, drive them to remote locations, and kill them without hesitation. He further revealed that he selected his victims based on appearance, specifically targeting young, slim, and short women with light hair. Detectives immediately recognized the significance of this description. Rebekah had fit his preferred victim profile perfectly. This new information led investigators to reconsider the nature of her murder. Had she been targeted specifically because she matched Miller's preferred type? If Miller was indeed a serial killer, this would explain why he had chosen to kill his cousin's girlfriend without any discernible motive. The act was not personal. It was simply another in a long pattern of horrific crimes. With this confession, law enforcement agencies across multiple jurisdictions reopened cold cases in an attempt to link Miller to other unsolved murders. While the extent of his crimes remains uncertain, one fact is clear. Rebekah's murder was not an isolated incident, but part of a much larger, far more sinister pattern. Given that Miller had spent 25 years working on offshore oil rigs, his job had taken him across multiple states and even international locations. This transient lifestyle meant that he had the opportunity to commit numerous crimes without attracting much suspicion. If his confessions about additional murders were true, it would suggest that his violent tendencies had been present for decades, and Rebekah was just one of many victims. However, as of now, law enforcement officials have not yet found concrete evidence to support these claims, leaving many questions unanswered. Investigators continue to comb through old case files, re-examining unsolved murders that match Miller's pattern and victim type, hoping to uncover links that might bring justice to other families. In 2022, after a lengthy legal process, William Miller was officially sentenced to 40 years in prison for his confession to Rebekah's murder. In the early hours of January 26, 2022, at approximately 6 a.m., a distressed man dialed emergency services. His voice trembled with panic as he urgently reported that his girlfriend was unresponsive. Identifying himself as doctor, he explained that he had already attempted to resuscitate her by performing CPR. While staying on the line, he continued his attempts to revive her, his growing frustration evident in his increasingly frantic efforts. Within minutes, first responders arrived at the scene. However, as they assessed the situation, it became painfully clear that nothing more could be done. The young woman, later identified as Sarah, had passed away several hours earlier. Join us as we explore a real case involving Sarah Jane Harris. She was born on December 5, 1996 in Rockville, Montgomery County, Maryland. She was the youngest of 4 siblings in the loving and close-knit family of Tina Lynn and Mark Harris. She grew up alongside her older sisters, Victoria and Rachel, and her brother, Christopher. From an early age, Sarah displayed an independent nature and an intense drive to succeed. She was fiercely ambitious, excelling academically with a particular passion for biology and anatomy. As a teenager, she became resolute in her decision to pursue a career in medicine. Her teachers and mentors recognized her as a prodigy, frequently praising her intellect and commitment. They predicted she would achieve great things and leave a lasting impact in the medical field. Languages also came naturally to Sarah. With an impressive aptitude for learning, she swiftly mastered both French and Spanish, speaking them fluently by the time she reached high school. Her linguistic skills gave her an edge in various aspects of life, from communicating with diverse groups to broadening her professional aspirations. Despite her academic commitments, Sarah was determined to be self-sufficient from an early age. At just 16 years old, she took on her first job as a promotional representative at a well-known local toy store. She entertained children by dressing up as beloved Disney princesses and other fairy tale characters, a role she found both enjoyable and fulfilling. One day, while performing at the store, a modeling scout noticed Sarah's striking features, flawless posture, and natural elegance. He saw in her the potential for a lucrative career in modeling and approached her with an invitation to attend an audition. Initially hesitant, she eventually agreed, intrigued by the possibilities the fashion industry might hold. From that moment, Sarah's journey in modeling began, leading her into a new and exciting world. Sarah's breathtaking appearance and perfectly proportioned figure quickly gained attention. Offers for photo shoots poured in, and she soon secured several advertising contracts. Her career in modeling began to flourish, and with each passing year, she grew in popularity. However, despite the growing success in the fashion industry, she remained committed to her dream of becoming a doctor. Juggling her studies with modeling gigs, she continued to push herself academically, researching colleges and universities that would provide the best education for her medical aspirations. Friends and acquaintances often described Sarah as sociable, lively, and brimming with energy. She had an undeniable charm that drew people to her, yet she was selective with whom she let into her personal life. She had a deep love for the arts, indulging in painting, music, traveling, and dancing. Her natural curiosity made her eager to explore the world and experience different cultures. Though she had admirers, Sarah rarely prioritized romantic relationships, preferring to focus on her studies and work. Her aspirations always took precedence. By 2020, at the age of 23, Sarah had already achieved what many could only dream of. She won her state's beauty pageant, earning the coveted title and crown of Miss Maryland. At the same time, she was completing her university education and had secured an internship at an esteemed private dental clinic. On the surface, she had it all: intelligence, beauty, a promising career, and an enviable future ahead. But beneath this picture-perfect facade, a much darker reality was unfolding. Sarah's older sister, Rachel, with whom she shared a particularly close bond, would later reveal chilling details that many in Sarah's life never suspected. According to Rachel, Sarah had been harboring a hidden struggle for years. It had all begun when she was just 16 years old. Around the time she got her first job and started earning her own money, she secretly began experimenting with various substances. At first, it was seemingly harmless, over-the-counter medications from the family's home medicine cabinet. But when taken in excessive doses or mixed with other drugs, they produced effects that fascinated her, creating sensations she had never experienced before. As Sarah became increasingly intrigued by these altered states of mind, she started associating with an older and more questionable crowd. These new acquaintances, many of whom were already involved in prohibited substances abuse, exposed her to stronger prescription medications. Before long, what had started as innocent curiosity evolved into a dependency. Her struggles intensified as she began to experience anxiety disorders, erratic mood swings, and a deepening reliance on substances. At night, she battled relentless insomnia, haunted by recurring nightmares. Chronic depression began to take hold, clouding her thoughts and draining her once boundless energy. Despite these afflictions, she continued to excel in school and maintain her job, giving no outward indication of the turmoil she was enduring. The only person aware of the depth of her struggles was Rachel, who had sworn to keep her secret from their mother. It was a silence that would come at a devastating cost. By the time Sarah turned 18, her family had started to notice alarming changes in her behavior. Her once vibrant personality had begun to dim. She exhibited severe mood swings, one moment laughing, the next breaking down into tears or erupting into sudden bouts of aggression. The unpredictability unsettled those around her, and her loved ones grew increasingly concerned. Despite their worries, her mother, Tina, refused to believe that her daughter might be involved with controlled substances. Instead, she attributed Sarah's erratic behavior to stress and the pressures of balancing school, work, and modeling. Eventually, Sarah's family insisted she seek professional help. After undergoing thorough evaluations and multiple consultations with psychiatrists, she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. The diagnosis provided a possible explanation for her erratic moods, and she was prescribed medication to help regulate her condition. For a short time, she followed the doctor's recommendations, hoping to regain stability. But secretly from her family, she did not give up the stronger substances to which she had already become addicted. As Sarah's dependency continued to escalate, her life became a delicate balancing act between maintaining appearances and battling her inner demons. By 2018, still a dedicated college student, she found solace in escapism, often seeking brief moments of joy in social events. That summer, she attended a highly anticipated rock music festival in a neighboring state with a group of close friends. The vibrant atmosphere, electrifying performances, and sheer energy of the event offered her a temporary reprieve from her struggles. It was there, amidst the roaring guitars and flashing stage lights, that she met Henry Peterson, a charismatic and enigmatic musician whose presence was as compelling as his talent. Almost instantly, Sarah felt an undeniable connection with him. The attraction was magnetic and mutual, and they spent the remainder of the festival inseparable. When the event concluded, neither of them wanted to say goodbye, so they exchanged phone numbers and promised to keep in touch. Despite her striking beauty and undeniable popularity, Sarah had little experience in romantic relationships. Henry became her first serious love, a relationship unlike any she had ever known. He was nearly 7 years older, but the age gap hardly mattered. Their connection was built on shared interests: music, art, deep conversations about life, and a passion for adventure. However, there was one major complication: distance. Henry lived nearly 10 hours away, a fact that loomed over their budding romance. A dedicated musician, Henry spent most of his time touring across the country with his band. Meanwhile, Sarah remained tied to her studies, work, and increasingly complicated personal struggles. Their meetings were infrequent, stolen moments when Henry could afford to travel to her. When together, their time was magical, but when apart, they relied on phone calls, late-night texts, and social media messages to stay connected. They made promises about the future, even discussing the possibility of starting a family. Yet the strain of distance and Sarah's unpredictable mood swings gradually took its toll. The relationship began to waver under the weight of her worsening dependency. Henry, despite his deep feelings for Sarah, grew more and more worried about her well-being. After nearly a year and a half together, he made the painful decision to initiate a breakup, citing concerns over her emotional volatility and growing reliance on substances. Though heartbroken, Sarah understood. Even after their romantic relationship ended, Henry remained a source of unwavering support. They continued speaking regularly, and whenever she needed him, he was there. If Sarah ever felt lost or overwhelmed, she knew she could call him, and he would never turn her away. By 2020, Sarah's life had reached a crossroads. Her academic ambitions remained intact, and she continued striving toward her dream of a medical career. One seemingly routine day, she visited a private dental clinic to have her wisdom teeth removed, a procedure she had delayed for months due to persistent discomfort. The surgery required multiple visits, as the impaction of the teeth made extraction a complex process. She was fortunate enough to be treated by the clinic's esteemed owner, Dr. James Ryan. The appointment was considered a rare privilege, as Ryan was known for his exceptional skill and had a schedule booked months in advance. Throughout her treatment, Sarah found him to be attentive and meticulous. He personally checked on her recovery, calling after each session to ensure she was healing properly. She found his concern endearing and respected him as both a professional and a person of influence in the medical community. During one of their conversations, Sarah casually mentioned that she was a medical student actively searching for an internship. Without hesitation, Dr. Ryan extended an offer, an assistant position at his clinic, an opportunity that many aspiring dental professionals could only dream of. After thoughtful consideration, Sarah accepted. The chance to work at one of the most prestigious dental practices in the city seemed like the perfect stepping stone in her career. At first, their relationship remained strictly professional. Sarah admired Ryan's expertise and dedication, while he seemed genuinely invested in mentoring her. However, as the months passed, the dynamic between them shifted. Dr. Ryan began showing a clear personal interest in her. He complimented her frequently, found excuses to spend time with her outside of work, and lavished her with attention. Initially, Sarah resisted his advances. The nearly 20-year age difference, his established status, and his reputation as a well-connected and powerful man made her hesitant. But Ryan was persistent, and over time, Sarah found herself drawn to his charm. By early 2021, their professional relationship had evolved into something much more. Before long, they had decided to take the next step, moving in together into Ryan's luxurious home. At the time, Dr. Ryan was a 47-year-old divorced man with an extensive history. He had 3 adult children from his previous marriage and a young son from a brief relationship with a former employee of his clinic. Known for his wealth and generosity, he provided for all his children, ensuring they had the best education and financial security. To those around him, Ryan was a respected doctor and a refined gentleman, but he also carried a reputation for being a notorious ladies' man. Ryan's clinic was one of the most well-known and sought-after dental practices in Montgomery County. The clinic's high-end services came at a steep price, yet its elite clientele had no hesitation in paying for the promise of flawless results. Patients often waited months for an appointment, and the waiting list continued to grow due to the overwhelming demand for Dr. Ryan's expertise. When Sarah started dating Dr. James Ryan, her friends saw her as incredibly fortunate. He was wealthy, influential, and seemingly devoted to her. The relationship came with many perks: lavish gifts, luxury resort vacations not just for Sarah but for her entire family, and even a high-end car, which he presented to her on their first anniversary. The opulent lifestyle quickly consumed Sarah. Soon after they became an official couple, her professional responsibilities at the clinic dwindled. She rarely came to work, yet her paycheck arrived as usual. Instead of assisting in treatments or handling patient files, she spent her days indulging in shopping sprees, spa treatments, and expensive getaways, fully immersed in a world of luxury that few could ever dream of. Everything seemed picture-perfect until tragedy struck in a way that no one saw coming. On January 26, 2022, at approximately 6 a.m., an anxious and distraught man dialed emergency services, his voice trembling as he reported that his girlfriend was unresponsive. He identified himself as Dr. James Ryan and claimed that he had attempted CPR but was unable to revive her. His pleas were urgent, desperate even, as he begged paramedics to arrive as quickly as possible. However, when first responders reached the scene, the reality was grim. Sarah had already passed away several hours prior. Her lifeless body was found on the living room floor, lying motionless near the couch. The scene was unsettling. There were no apparent signs of physical injury or trauma, but Sarah's physical state was alarming. She appeared extremely thin and frail, a stark contrast to the vibrant young woman many had known. Nearby, James was visibly shaken, his face pale and streaked with tears. He kept repeating the same words. She had suffered an overdose. Investigators immediately explored 2 potential explanations: accidental overdose or foul play. At first, the latter seemed unlikely due to the absence of external injuries or indications of a struggle. Initial observations pointed toward the conclusion that Sarah had consumed a lethal dose of powerful substances on her own. According to James, the previous night had been uneventful. He claimed that they had spent the evening together watching television, a common routine. Around midnight, Sarah mentioned she had an early work shift the next morning and needed to get some rest. He recalled that she stayed behind to finish the movie while he retired upstairs to bed. It wasn't until around 5:30 a.m. that he realized she had never joined him. Concerned, he went downstairs to check on her, only to be met with a horrifying sight. Sarah was sprawled on the floor, completely unresponsive, with a thick white foam seeping from her mouth. As a trained medical professional, James claimed he immediately jumped into action. He turned Sarah onto her side, checked for vital signs, and initiated CPR. He reportedly performed mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and chest compressions for nearly 15 minutes in a desperate attempt to revive her. When his efforts proved futile, he finally called 911, explaining that she had likely overdosed on a combination of medications. In his statement to authorities, Ryan suggested that Sarah may have consumed an excessive amount of a powerful anesthetic, potentially mixing it with other medications. He also admitted something shocking. Sarah had been secretly taking medications from his clinic for personal use for quite some time. While he was aware of this, he had chosen not to report her, fearing legal repercussions and public scandal. He insisted that he had done everything within his power to help Sarah combat her dependency. He further revealed that he had frequently administered IV drips at home to detoxify her system, hoping to counteract the effects of substance intoxication. He even attempted to consult specialists, discreetly seeking professional intervention without exposing the issue to the public. Despite his claims of concern and care, Sarah's condition had deteriorated right under his nose. Ryan claimed that he had first discovered Sarah's dependency not long after she had moved in with him. One night, he had accidentally walked in on her in the bathroom, catching her in the act of administering an injection. Shocked, he had demanded an explanation. Sarah had tearfully confessed that she had been battling bipolar disorder, anxiety, and severe depression since her teenage years, and that self-medicating was the only way she knew how to cope. She had assured him that she was in control, that she only used the substances to maintain balance and avoid emotional breakdowns. Ryan's statements seemed convincing, and toxicology reports supported his claims. Sarah had passed away due to a lethal combination of multiple potent substances. The autopsy showed no signs of external injuries or trauma. However, her veins bore the unmistakable scars of long-term intravenous use. Additionally, her physical state at the time of her passing was alarming. She was severely underweight and frail, weighing a mere 83 pounds, a drastic contrast to the vibrant and lively young woman she had once been. That same morning, Sarah's mother, Tina, received the devastating news. Investigators informed her of the circumstances of her daughter's death, relaying James Ryan's account of events. But from the very beginning, Tina made it clear that she did not believe a single word he said. Overcome with grief and anger, she immediately placed blame on James, convinced that he was responsible for what had happened to Sarah. She had always harbored a deep distrust of him, feeling that there was something predatory about his interest in her daughter. Tina had her own version of the events leading up to Sarah's death, one that painted James Ryan in a far more sinister light. According to her, Sarah had never truly loved him. Instead, he had meticulously manipulated her, using wealth and influence to ensnare her in a web of dependence, ensuring she would never leave him. 2 years prior, Sarah had been referred to Ryan's clinic for a routine dental procedure, the surgical removal of her wisdom teeth. At the time, she was a bright and ambitious young woman, focused on her medical studies. From their very first meeting, however, James Ryan's interest in her had little to do with professional care. He pursued her relentlessly, first as a patient, and then as a young woman he wished to possess. He called her daily, sent flirtatious messages, and made it abundantly clear that he was drawn to her. When he learned that she was searching for an internship, he wasted no time in offering her a prestigious position at his clinic, complete with a generous salary and exclusive access to high-profile clients. To Sarah, it was an opportunity too good to pass up, and despite her mother's unease, she accepted the offer without hesitation. Tina, however, remained deeply suspicious. She tried to warn her daughter, attempting to have a serious conversation about the dangers of getting involved with an older, powerful man. But Sarah dismissed her mother's concerns, insisting that their relationship was strictly professional. At first, that seemed to be true. Their interactions were nothing more than a close mentorship, until they weren't. By late 2021, their relationship had escalated beyond a professional partnership. As New Year's Eve approached, Ryan invited Sarah to an exclusive high-end restaurant. There, in the midst of a luxurious setting, he presented her with an extravagant diamond ring worth a small fortune. That night, he professed his love, asked her to be his partner, and suggested that they move in together. Up until that moment, Sarah had accepted his gifts with polite gratitude, but she had never fully reciprocated his affections. Yet something about that night changed everything. Whether it was the weight of expectation, the pressure of his generosity, or a simple resignation to the lifestyle he was offering, Sarah agreed. Within a month of moving into his estate, James gifted her a brand new Mitsubishi, solidifying her transition into a life of luxury. To Tina, this was nothing more than a calculated ploy. James wasn't winning Sarah's love. He was buying it. And he wasn't just providing for Sarah. He was lavishing gifts and expensive vacations on Tina and her other daughters as well, strategically disarming them and lowering their defenses. Before they realized it, they had been pulled into his orbit, their suspicions dulled by his seemingly endless generosity. But James had uncovered something else, something far more dangerous than Sarah's affection: her addiction. Before long, Ryan became aware that certain controlled substances were vanishing from his clinic's storage. Initially, he chose to ignore it. But when he eventually caught Sarah in the act, rather than reprimand her, he enabled her. He never reported her theft, nor did he intervene to stop her from using. According to Tina, this wasn't negligence, it was intentional. Sarah had become reliant on the substances, and James knew it. Rather than risk losing her, he kept her supply steady. Tina was convinced that he was the one who had first introduced her daughter to injectable prohibited substances, pulling her deeper into dependency so that she would remain under his control. There was one memory, in particular, that haunted Tina. A chilling confession James had made during a family trip to Hawaii. One evening, after drinking too much, he let something slip. He admitted that the first time he had ever seen Sarah was not at his clinic, but years earlier, when she was just a teenager. She had been working at a local toy store, dressed as a princess for a promotional event. At the time, he had been there with his children, and yet, something about her had captivated him. According to Tina, he had been obsessed with Sarah ever since, silently plotting to entangle her in his world. Despite these suspicions, authorities never conducted a formal search of James Ryan's home. Instead of conducting a thorough search, investigators performed only a brief walkthrough of Ryan's home, failing to examine critical areas or seize potential evidence. The initial findings appeared to support Ryan's version of events. Prescription medications were found not only in Sarah's purse and bedside drawer, but also scattered throughout her car and the house. Additionally, investigators discovered discarded syringe wrappers, tourniquets, IV solution bottles, and other paraphernalia that further reinforced the assumption that Sarah had been using substances for an extended period. Several empty vials and ampules lay near Sarah's body, and traces of these substances were later detected in her system. It appeared as though she had administered them to herself shortly before her passing. The combination of medications ultimately led to her untimely death, or so the authorities concluded. As detectives combed through Sarah's belongings, they found a series of troubling text messages on her phone exchanged with her former boyfriend, Henry, whom she had remained close with despite their breakup. In her final texts, Sarah confided in him about her escalating depression and hinted at the possibility of making a tragic decision to end her suffering. Investigators interpreted these messages as confirmation that Sarah had been contemplating about the bad. With no obvious signs of foul play and no further evidence linking Ryan to any wrongdoing, the case was swiftly closed. No criminal charges were filed, Ryan's home was not designated as a crime scene, and he was released without any legal repercussions. Because of this swift determination, law enforcement failed to seize Sarah's personal belongings for further examination. Her phone and laptop, potential gold mines of information, were not taken into evidence, leaving significant questions unanswered. Sarah's family was outraged. They strongly disagreed with the investigation's findings and remained convinced that Dr. James Ryan was directly responsible for her tragic fate. To them, the case was far from open and shut. Determined to seek justice, Sarah's mother, Tina, and her sisters took matters into their own hands, launching an independent investigation in hopes of exposing the truth. Tina returned to the police station, hoping to provide additional testimony that might prompt officials to reopen the case. She shared disturbing details about the drastic changes she had observed in her daughter after she moved in with Ryan. According to Tina, Sarah underwent a shocking physical and emotional transformation, becoming a shadow of her former self. By the summer of 2021, her weight loss was impossible to ignore. While Sarah had always been slim due to her modeling career, she had become frighteningly thin, her once radiant complexion replaced by a ghostly pallor. That October, James took Sarah and her mother on vacation to Florida, a seemingly generous gesture that masked a much darker reality. During the trip, Tina noticed that, despite the warm, tropical climate, Sarah insisted on wearing long-sleeved clothing at all times. This struck her as odd, but she didn't immediately press the issue. However, upon their return home, things took a more alarming turn. Just days later, Sarah called her mother in the middle of the night, speaking in a dazed and disoriented manner. Alarmed, Tina rushed to Ryan's house and found her daughter barely coherent. Her speech was slurred, her body weak, and her movements uncoordinated. It was in that moment that Tina first noticed the marks on Sarah's arms. She was horrified to see the bruises, track marks, and puncture wounds covering her daughter's skin. Scattered around the house were empty vials and ampules. Convinced that James had been supplying Sarah with dangerous substances, Tina wanted to alert the authorities immediately. She took photographs of the evidence, desperate to document what she had found. But Sarah begged her not to go to the police. Through tears, she insisted that everything was under control and that James was actually trying to help her, not hurt her. To appease her mother, she agreed to return home for a while. But within days, she went back to Ryan's house, falling even deeper into his grasp. Then, on December 13th, the nightmare repeated itself. Once again, Sarah called her mother in a highly disoriented state, barely able to form coherent sentences. Panic-stricken, Tina rushed over once more, only to find an even more disturbing scene. Sarah's weight had dropped to a dangerously low level, her body little more than skin and bones. Her arms were covered in even more needle marks. Next to the couch where she lay stood an IV stand, tubes still attached to her arm. Scattered across the floor were empty vials, some of which contained unknown substances. Tina tried to intervene, insisting that her daughter come home with her immediately. But James and Sarah resisted. Once again, they dismissed her concerns, claiming that Sarah had merely been receiving IV treatments to combat dehydration. Tina refused to believe this explanation. She tried to take Sarah home by force, but this time, Sarah was adamant. She threatened to cut off all contact with her family if they interfered. In the end, Tina had no choice but to leave, though every instinct in her body told her that her daughter was in grave danger. That was the last time Tina ever saw Sarah alive. After Sarah's tragic passing, her mother and sister were unwilling to accept the official conclusion of her death. Desperate for answers, they took possession of her phone and laptop, determined to uncover any evidence that would expose Dr. James Ryan's involvement. They spent sleepless nights combing through every message, email, and call log, hoping to find a hidden truth. As they meticulously examined Sarah's conversations, a disturbing pattern emerged. There were countless exchanges between Sarah and James, many of which referenced specific medications, powerful anesthetics, sedatives, and tranquilizers. The tone of the messages was alarming. James frequently reassured Sarah that he would take care of everything and make sure she had what she needed. At times, Sarah expressed anxiety over running out of certain substances, to which James always responded promptly, promising to bring her more. The most chilling discovery was the realization that for the last 6 months of her life, Sarah had barely been showing up at the clinic. She had become a recluse, rarely leaving Ryan's home. According to those close to her, she had been in a near-constant state of intoxication, and James had deliberately kept her hidden to avoid drawing attention. He continued to finance all of her expenses, indulging her every request, including the dangerous substances she had come to depend on. He knew that as long as he provided for her addiction, she would remain under his control. Determined to seek justice, Sarah's sister took immediate action. She printed out all of the messages exchanged between Sarah and James, highlighting the most damning conversations where they openly discussed controlled substances. Along with the text messages, Sarah's mother attached the photographs she had taken during her visits to Ryan's home, images of empty vials. Together, they compiled an overwhelming dossier of evidence and presented it to law enforcement, demanding that a criminal case be opened against Dr. Ryan for intentional harm leading to death. The investigation was reopened, and law enforcement took a deeper look into the circumstances surrounding Sarah's untimely demise. On March 22nd, Following weeks of renewed investigation, Dr. James Ryan was formally arrested and charged in connection with Sarah's death. During the trial, prosecutors presented a compelling case against him. The evidence showed a clear pattern of manipulation and control, portraying Ryan not as a concerned partner, but as a man who had knowingly fueled Sarah's addiction for his own selfish reasons. Witnesses described how Sarah had become isolated under his influence, cut off from friends and family, completely dependent on him for survival. The jury was particularly struck by the mother's testimony, detailing her desperate attempts to save her daughter. On August 25, 2023, after weeks of emotional testimony and legal battles, the court reached a verdict. James Ryan was found guilty of second-degree homicide, as the jury determined that he had been fully aware of the life-threatening consequences of his actions. The sentence was severe. James Ryan was sentenced to 45 years in prison, with the possibility of parole no earlier than 30 years into his sentence. This island has always been a place of rest and tranquility. What began as a fleeting vacation in paradise turned into a chilling and brutal tragedy, marked by violence that was almost inexplicable in its brutality. The police were horrified and shocked by what they saw, and the news spread quickly across the island, sparking a mixture of shock and alarm. Guests on the island wondered how such horror could occur in a place that seemed like paradise. As the case unfolded, the world watched with bated breath, hoping for answers. Miriam Belta was a vibrant and ambitious young woman, cherished by her family and friends for her genuine warmth, strong will, and boundless curiosity. Born and raised in Hanover, Germany, she developed a close bond with her family and built a wide circle of friends who admired her deep empathy, sincerity, and driven nature. From a young age, Miriam stood out not only for her natural kindness, but for her inquisitive spirit, often delving deeply into any subject that piqued her interest. Her family noticed early on her remarkable aptitude for science and mathematics, an inclination she would nurture over the years and eventually channel into a successful engineering career. Her time at the University of Hanover was marked by both academic success and personal growth. As a student of engineering, Miriam thrived in the challenging male-dominated field, quickly gaining a reputation among her peers for her focus, intellect, and attention to detail. Her professors admired her commitment. She frequently spent long hours perfecting projects and often took on extra research work to deepen her understanding. It was during these university years that Miriam truly began to blossom as an engineer, developing not only her technical skills but a genuine passion for her field. This dedication did not go unnoticed. Upon graduating, she was recruited by a prominent German engineering firm where her skills, discipline, and integrity quickly earned the respect of her colleagues. For Miriam, engineering was more than a career. It was a fulfilling challenge, a world where she could make a real impact and grow her potential. Her career trajectory promised immense possibilities, and those close to her knew that Miriam's future was bright. Outside her demanding career, Miriam nurtured a passionate love for nature and travel. She found solace and joy in exploring new places, often venturing into untouched landscapes and experiencing new cultures firsthand. To her, travel was more than a leisure activity. It was a way to escape the structured and demanding routines of her professional life and rediscover a sense of balance. She particularly adored tropical settings, where the beauty of the ocean, lush greenery, and open skies gave her an unparalleled sense of peace. Friends remembered how her face would light up when she spoke of her travel plans, her enthusiasm contagious as she recounted her dreams of exploring distant, beautiful parts of the world. Among these destinations, Thailand had long been a cherished goal, a place where she could lose herself in the warmth of the sun, enjoy the sea's embrace, and immerse herself in a culture different from her own. In 2019, Miriam finally fulfilled her dream of visiting Thailand. The trip represented more than just a holiday. It was a well-earned respite following the completion of a series of demanding projects. Combining business with relaxation, she scheduled her trip to include a visit to a supplier, planning to unwind and explore a few days on her own before returning to Germany. Miriam's family and friends were reassured, knowing her as a cautious and meticulous traveler who made safety a priority. She was the kind of person who would prepare carefully, sharing her itinerary with loved ones, frequently checking in, and avoiding any unnecessary risks. The island of Si Chang, a peaceful haven off Thailand's coast, was the ideal destination for someone like Miriam. This tranquil paradise, characterized by turquoise waters, white sandy beaches, and ancient jungle, was largely untouched by commercial tourism. The island exuded a timeless beauty that encouraged reflection and relaxation. Locals were used to the calm and order of island life, a close-knit community with a natural rhythm, and disturbances were virtually unheard of in this serene environment. However, something went terribly wrong on the morning Miriam was set to leave the island. When she didn't show up for breakfast as expected, hotel staff grew concerned. After repeated, unanswered calls to her room, concern turned to alarm. Hours went by, and when it became clear that she had gone missing, authorities were alerted. Initially, they treated the situation as a minor delay or miscommunication, but as the hours stretched on, the seriousness of her absence became impossible to ignore. Records indicated that Miriam had indeed traveled to Thailand initially for work, fulfilling her obligations and completing a successful meeting with her supplier. Her colleagues recalled her mentioning that she looked forward to relaxing on Si Chang before heading home. It was customary for Miriam to combine business trips with a few days of personal exploration, especially in such an idyllic setting. Her friends described her as a responsible traveler, someone who planned meticulously and took few risks, even while exploring off-the-beaten-path locations. Friends and family struggled to understand how something so unsettling could happen to Miriam in such a quiet, beautiful place. Her habit of staying connected and her highly organized nature made her sudden disappearance even more bewildering. This was a woman who never left her family guessing, who stayed in contact, and who never missed a flight or overlooked the details of her travel plans. The abrupt stop in communication was wholly uncharacteristic and deeply alarming, leaving those who knew and loved her searching for answers and dreading the silence. Miriam's love for exploring nature and her dreams of experiencing the world made her disappearance even more heartbreaking. Those closest to her were left grappling with unanswerable questions. How could a bright young woman with so much to offer vanish without a trace? Her journey, which was meant to be a celebration of her achievements and love for life, had taken a devastating turn. For Miriam's family, the days following her disappearance stretched endlessly, each moment a painful reminder of her absence. Her mother, who had always cherished her daughter's independent spirit, was now caught between hoping for her safe return and fearing the worst. Friends gathered, supporting one another as they shared memories of Miriam's laughter, her adventurous stories, and her generous heart. The vibrant, ambitious young woman who had once been so full of life was now a haunting absence, leaving those who knew her with a deep, aching void. Despite her usually cautious nature, some locals on Si Chang remembered Miriam's evident curiosity about the hidden corners of the island. She seemed drawn to places that were seldom mentioned in travel brochures: secluded beaches, quiet coves, and dense patches of jungle where one could feel truly distanced from the bustle of modern life. The few tour guides she spoke with recalled that she had specifically inquired about hidden beaches and tranquil spots, far from the usual tourist paths. Her interest in these remote places struck them as a bit unusual. Miriam typically followed a clear plan, ensuring every detail was considered and organized. Friends knew her as someone who always had her travel arrangements meticulously outlined, a testament to her careful and methodical personality. However, this time, it seemed she was seeking something more than just a structured visit. She was in search of solitude, a place where she could lose herself in the natural beauty around her, immersed in a moment of quiet reflection. Miriam had even avoided the popular, bustling areas in favor of paths less traveled. She was hoping to find places where she could be alone with nature, capturing photographs and moments that wouldn't be found in the usual tourist albums. Her morning began with a ferry ride to the island, a serene experience that marked the start of her short escape. True to her organized habits, Miriam rented a motorbike the moment she arrived, ready to explore the island as planned. One of her intended destinations was an ancient stone temple, a secluded site known only to those willing to make the arduous journey up a steep hill. This temple, partially hidden behind thick, overgrown foliage, was a place revered by locals for its tranquil and reflective ambiance. Reaching it was no easy task. Only the most determined visitors took on the steep ascent, with stone steps that were uneven and slippery, worn by time and weather. But for Miriam, This challenge only added to the destination's appeal. It was exactly the type of off-the-beaten-path experience she sought. Miriam's rented motorbike remained parked at the base of the hill as she started her climb, passing by a small flower stall where a vendor was arranging fresh bouquets of jasmine and calendula. Her expression was serene, with a hint of a smile, as though she anticipated a meaningful encounter with the secluded beauty of the temple. Everything seemed to point to a peaceful day, spent exploring and connecting with the stillness of her surroundings. But as time passed, Miriam didn't return. By evening, her motorbike remained in the same spot beside the now-closed flower stall, standing as a silent testament to her absence. Concern began to grow as locals realized she hadn't come back down. The flower vendor, who had noticed her parked bike earlier, became worried and reported her disappearance to the authorities the following day. What initially began as a routine search for a missing tourist soon turned into a complex investigation. When investigators traced her route, they discovered that Miriam had only planned for a brief stay on the island. Her day trip was scheduled to include a short exploration, a few photographs, a quick meal, and then a return to the mainland. Friends and family emphasized how meticulous and cautious she was. Miriam was not one to take unnecessary risks. She avoided strangers, kept her valuables close, and always checked in with her family. So when her messages suddenly stopped by noon on April 7th, her family knew immediately that something was wrong. By that evening, it was as if Miriam had vanished without a trace. The temple on the hilltop, where she was last seen heading, wasn't on any conventional tourist itinerary. It was surrounded by dense jungle, and the climb was challenging. Stone steps, slick with moss and shadows cast by thick overhanging trees, made the ascent even more daunting. As investigators delved deeper, a new clue emerged. A few days prior, Miriam had been spotted at a small cafe near the island's pier, seated with an unfamiliar man. Witnesses couldn't identify him, but he seemed comfortable enough to chat with her over coffee, suggesting they might have met during her journey. It was possible they had connected on the ferry or at her hotel, but no one recalled seeing them together again after that encounter. This mysterious man became a focal point for the investigation, a potential piece in the puzzle of her unexplained disappearance. Her family and friends were left to grapple with unsettling questions. Who was this man? Had Miriam made plans to meet him at the temple? And what, if anything, had happened between them on that lonely hilltop path? The search for Miriam unfolded against the backdrop of the serene island, a place of natural beauty now marked by whispers of worry and confusion. Friends and family in Germany were distraught, clinging to hope yet fearing the worst. For those closest to Miriam, the idea that she had vanished in a place she once saw as a sanctuary was unbearable. They remembered her vibrant personality, her love for life, and her joy in exploring the unknown. The thought that her journey ended with silence and ambiguity was a nightmare from which they could not awaken. As time passed, the mystery of Miriam Belta's disappearance only deepened. The police were left with fragments of her journey, a snapshot of her last ascent, a parked motorbike, and unanswered questions about the stranger at the cafe. On the morning of April 8, 2019, Xichang Island was thrown into turmoil with the discovery that would shake the quiet community. A Thai tourist, accustomed to taking an early morning hike to a remote temple to enjoy the tranquility of the jungle, unknowingly stumbled upon a horrifying scene. As he moved along the dense, stone-strewn path, his focus shifted to a peculiar pale shape tucked away near the edge of a small ravine. His curiosity urged him closer, and through the thick foliage, he began to make out what lay before him, a young woman's body wedged between rocks, partially hidden under branches and leaves, as though someone had tried to obscure her from view. The scene was both unsettling and tragic. The woman's body bore clear signs of violence. Multiple bruises, cuts, and bloodstains nearby suggested a struggle. Disturbed by what he had discovered, the hiker quickly called local emergency services, and within an hour, a team of police officers was navigating the steep trail to reach the remote location. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in Germany, panic was spreading among the loved ones of Miriam Belta. Morning dawned with still no contact from Miriam, and her family's concern turned to dread. Alarmed by the silence, they filed a missing persons report, hoping for a swift response. Investigators on Sea Chang were quick to identify the victim as Miriam Belta, the young German tourist who had been staying at a local hotel. According to the hotel staff, she was expected to return to Bangkok on April 7th, but had not checked out, and her rented motorbike was still parked at the base of the hill leading to the temple. Initially, authorities considered that she might have suffered a tragic accident, perhaps a fall on the slick stone trail. However, a closer examination of her injuries immediately discounted this theory. The trauma Miriam had sustained was not consistent with an accidental fall. Instead, her body bore unmistakable signs of a violent attack. Her face and head had sustained multiple bruises, and additional evidence pointed to a physical assault, casting a grim shadow over the incident. The investigation quickly took on an urgent tone. Police examined footage from the area's surveillance cameras, particularly those located along the trail and in the parking area where Miriam had left her motorbike. The footage captured Miriam ascending the temple steps, clutching a water bottle and carrying a small backpack. Her demeanor was calm, and she moved with a sense of purpose, unaware that this moment would be her last. But as officers replayed the footage, another figure caught their attention. Shortly after Miriam had disappeared from view around a curve in the path, a man appeared on camera, following at a distance. Clad in dark clothing, he seemed to be trailing her. Hours later, he returned down the path, his clothes noticeably disheveled and damp, with peculiar light-colored stains on them, drawing immediate suspicion. Investigators began to speak with locals, trying to trace the man's steps on the day of Miriam's disappearance. They found their first solid lead from a flower vendor at the base of the hill. The vendor recalled seeing the man arrive earlier in the day, his appearance and actions memorable for their oddity. The man had approached the stall, purchasing a bouquet of marigolds, a seemingly innocent act. But the vendor noticed that the man behaved unusually on his return. He was tense, glancing around as though nervous, and his clothes bore fresh stains. When the vendor casually asked if he was all right, the man hastily replied that he had slipped on the trail. The vendor found the encounter suspicious enough to jot down the motorbike's license plate, a small yet pivotal detail that would become crucial in the case. With Miriam's body now identified and the preliminary details of her last movements coming together, the police zeroed in on the mysterious man as their prime suspect. Using the vendor's account, the surveillance footage, and the license plate number, authorities traced the motorbike's registration to a local man named Ranakorn Romruin. At 24, Ranakorn was a resident of the island, working as a beach cleaner who spent much of his time along the coast. Ranakorn was known around town, though his quiet and somewhat reclusive nature meant he often kept to himself. As they canvassed the area, questioning those who might have seen him, locals began to share bits of information. Though Ranakorn had generally kept a low profile, he had been spotted alone at odd hours around the island's quieter areas. Some neighbors noted that he often returned late at night, his clothes sometimes streaked with mud or debris, behaviors that had raised eyebrows but had never seemed cause for alarm. As the investigation progressed, officers uncovered unsettling aspects of Ranakorn's past that had previously gone unnoticed. Although he had no criminal record, several community members recalled minor incidents that now took on a darker light. There were reports of odd behavior around female tourists and a few instances where locals had warned him to keep his distance after he had acted overly familiar with visitors. While no formal complaints had been filed, the subtle undercurrent of unease around Ranakorn now seemed like an ominous indicator of his capacity for violence. As police eventually captured Ranakorn, he was faced with overwhelming evidence linking him to the crime. His confession painted a horrifying picture, a narrative of anger, desperation, and cruelty that shocked even seasoned detectives. His words revealed the depth of his twisted motives, exposing an unsettling mind that had for years grappled with resentment and alienation. On April 7, 2019, Ranakorn's day began like any other. In the quiet pre-dawn hours, a mist hung low over the island's coastline, cloaking the surroundings in an almost eerie calm. Inside his small, dimly lit room, the thick, acrid stench of cheap alcohol lingered in the air, clinging to everything like an invisible fog. Empty bottles, some lying on their sides and others half drained, littered the surfaces around him. This ritual, a blur of intoxication and substances, had become a routine escape for Ronicorn, a desperate way to dull the incessant noise in his mind. But on this morning, the usual numbing effects were insufficient. Restlessness gnawed at him, an unfulfilled craving lingering beyond the typical oblivion his haze offered. Downing a few more shots, he sought a final, stronger hit to mute the sensation. Yet even as his senses dulled, an inexplicable urge began to grow, something he couldn't quite articulate. Driven by this inner itch, he stumbled out of his home, mounted his motorbike, and let the throttle guide him through the island's winding roads. The motorbike hummed beneath him, each turn through the empty streets only intensifying his craving for something he didn't understand, but felt he desperately needed. Eventually, his path brought him to a hill's base, where a narrow, winding trail led up to one of the island's less frequented temples. There, ascending the stone steps, was a young tourist. Miriam, moving with a calm, carefree presence that immediately caught his eye. Something about her ease, her oblivion to his presence, only stoked the unsettling fire simmering within him. Seeking an excuse to approach her, Ronicorn stepped into a small flower stall beside the trailhead and hastily purchased a bouquet of marigolds. He thought, in his clouded state, that the flowers might serve as a non-threatening way to initiate a conversation, perhaps even make him seem friendly. But as he paid, the vendor couldn't help but notice his intense, vacant gaze, a look that hinted at a dangerous mix of agitation and determination. Though unnerved, the vendor completed the sale, and Ronicorn, clutching the flowers, set off up the trail after Miriam. Miriam, meanwhile, was blissfully unaware of the stranger trailing her. Most likely, at that moment, her attention was captivated by the natural beauty surrounding her, and her thoughts were focused on reaching the quiet temple atop the hill, which she had heard so much about. She moved along the winding path, breathing in the cool morning air, savoring the solitude. But as Ronicorn approached, his dark figure closing in behind her, her serene day would take an unexpected turn. He attempted to start a conversation, offering marigolds as if extending them as a peace gesture, a gesture he thought might break the ice. Miriam, though polite, was puzzled by his abrupt approach. She offered a brief, courteous smile, accepting the flowers with an air of caution, hoping the exchange would end quickly. She turned to resume her hike, assuming he would take the hint and head back down the path. But Ronicorn had no such plans. Instead, he continued to follow her, his demeanor shifting from mere curiosity to something more intense, almost predatory. What had begun as a vague impulse was quickly morphing into something far darker, a sinister desire laced with frustration and a need for control. His polite facade slipped away, replaced by a growing aggression that Miriam, though still unaware of its depth, could feel intensifying. As the trail narrowed and the dense jungle swallowed the path, Miriam's sense of unease grew sharper. No other hikers were nearby, only the thick jungle surrounded them, muting the sounds and isolating her even further. She quickened her pace, but Ronicorn mirrored her speed, the space between them shrinking until she could hear his footsteps echoing too close behind. With each step, her solitude fractured, replaced by a looming presence she could not ignore. She glanced back, hoping to see him turn back, but his expression, no longer softened by the bouquet or pretense of friendliness, held a chilling edge. As she tried to put distance between them, Ronicorn closed the gap, his movements charged with a disturbing intent. In her heart, a sense of alarm began to rise. Miriam was out of options. The path was now surrounded by a thick jungle wall, the morning mist lingering around them, adding an unnatural stillness to the air. The beauty that had once drawn her here now felt like a trap, and her instincts urged her to stay vigilant. By the time Miriam sensed the full weight of the danger, it was too late. Ronicorn's fixation had turned into something else entirely, a menacing force that he could no longer contain. The shadow of his presence loomed closer, his intentions unclear but threateningly real. The events that followed remain unseen by surveillance cameras, but witness accounts, forensic evidence, and Ronicorn's later confession helped authorities reconstruct a disturbing series of events. Under the influence of a potent blend of alcohol and illicit substances, Ronicorn experienced a surge of reckless confidence that stripped away any sense of restraint. Feeling emboldened, he approached Miriam with a suggestion to accompany him to a nearby, more secluded area. Her response was immediate, her refusal clear, and her tone firm, revealing an undertone of fear. She attempted to walk away, quickening her pace as instinct told her the situation had turned dangerous. But Ronicorn was undeterred. Fueled by a volatile mix of anger, frustration, and a deep-seated resentment he barely understood, he chased after her, his steps growing into a determined sprint. What began as a moment of aggression quickly spiraled into a violent pursuit of control. Ronicorn lunged forward, grabbing Miriam's arm with a force that left her no choice but to struggle desperately. She screamed, her voice echoing through the dense forest. Yet there was no one nearby to hear her cries for help. Ronicorn struck Miriam in the face multiple times with a brick he had picked up along the way. Disoriented and terrified, she was overpowered, her strength no match for his brutal determination. He dragged her off the trail, pulling her into the undergrowth, where the thick vegetation consumed them from view. Miriam fought valiantly, her terror driving her to resist with all her might, but her efforts were ultimately futile. Alone in the shadows of the forest, her cries faded into silence, a harrowing end to what should have been a peaceful day. When the authorities began investigating, the signs left behind told a grim story. Displaced earth, trampled vegetation, and the wounds on Miriam's body made it clear that this was no accident or sudden misfortune. The struggle bore unmistakable marks of violence, and the police quickly realized they were dealing with an intentional, targeted act. Witnesses later reported that they had seen Ronicorn at a small flower stall on his way down from the hill. The vendor recalled a strange exchange. Ronicorn's clothes were visibly stained, and his gaze was agitated, flickering nervously around the area. When asked if he was okay, he casually responded that he had slipped. Yet his jittery demeanor, paired with the fresh stains on his clothes, left the vendor suspicious enough to note down his motorbike's license plate. A small but vital detail that would ultimately lead investigators directly to him. Back at his home that evening, Ronicorn attempted to continue as if nothing had happened. He immediately set about washing his clothes, scrubbing them repeatedly to erase any visible signs of the violence he had committed. Despite his efforts, faint stains remained, lingering evidence that could not be easily erased. His attempt to return to normalcy only underscored the disturbing casualness with which he treated his actions. When the police arrived at his door, Ronicorn offered no resistance. He opened the door, a strangely calm expression on his face, almost as though he had been expecting them. Though he initially appeared composed, his attempts to maintain a veneer of calm shattered once he reached the police station. In the interrogation room, faced with mounting evidence and relentless questioning, Ronicorn's facade crumbled. What began as attempts to deflect and mislead investigators quickly fell apart, and soon, he was detailing the chilling events of that day. Yet even with his confession, the investigation wasn't over. Authorities needed to verify every detail to ensure there were no remaining questions. To solidify the case, they arranged for a reenactment, an investigative measure to help verify his story and clarify the sequence of events. Onlookers gathered as police led Ronicorn back to the scene, his head covered with a black cloth to protect him from the crowd's curious and outraged stares. Step by step, he retraced his actions under the close scrutiny of the authorities. He pointed out where he had first approached Miriam, gestured to the spot where he had made his initial contact, and demonstrated each movement in the chilling sequence. Officers watched his every gesture and expression, alert for any signs of deception or omitted details. As he performed each step of his crime, the reality of his actions settled heavily on everyone present. The beautiful forested landscape, once a place of quiet solitude, had been transformed into a scene of dark reckoning. The reenactment provided the final pieces needed to solidify the case. With each gesture he demonstrated, the grim reality of his crime became more tangible, grounding the tragedy in the physical details of the location. The officers completed their observations, their case against Ronicorn now as solid as it could be. The local community, grieved and shaken by the horrific events, took solace in knowing that justice would follow. The trial of Ranakorn Romruan began under intense scrutiny, symbolizing not only the prosecution of a single individual, but a crucial test for Thailand's justice system in the face of a crime that had sent shockwaves far beyond the island of Sichang. Media outlets from around the world converged on the modest, crowded courtroom, their cameras broadcasting each moment of the proceedings to audiences in Miriam's home country of Germany and beyond. Every day, viewers, both local and international, watched closely, searching for any indication that justice would be served, not only for Miriam and her grieving family, but also as a testament to the integrity of the Thai judicial process. The evidence against Ranakorn was overwhelming and painted a disturbing picture. His confession was brutal, delivered without apology and devoid of any remorse. The courtroom fell silent each time he recounted the events, his voice unchanging and disturbingly calm as he detailed his actions. He spoke in a detached manner, almost as if narrating someone else's story, his tone cold and his gaze distant, leaving seasoned reporters and courtroom attendees visibly unsettled. For Miriam's family, the trauma of hearing the confession firsthand was unimaginable, and the emotion in the room was palpable. Journalists captured the faces of Miriam's loved ones, etched with sorrow and horror, conveying the pain of a family whose loved one's memory was now interwoven with this chilling trial. A dramatic shift in the proceedings occurred when Ranakorn's mother unexpectedly took the stand. Her appearance had not been widely anticipated, and as she entered the courtroom, an emotional charge filled the air. Taking her place in the witness stand, she looked across at the faces of Miriam's family, visibly pained and weighed down by the events that had brought them all to this tragic crossroad. Her voice trembled as she expressed profound regret and sorrow, speaking not only to Miriam's family, but also to the community at large. She apologized on behalf of her son, not defending his actions, but acknowledging the heartbreak and disruption they had brought. With deep sadness, she explained the estrangement that had developed between her and her son over the years, a divide widened by his struggles with substance abuse and self-imposed isolation. The pain in her eyes was unmistakable. A mother who had carried the heavy burden of her son's troubles, unable to recognize or prevent the darkness into which he had fallen. She described the challenges of watching him grow distant, recounting how she had hoped, time and again, that he would find his way back to a healthy and meaningful life. Now, standing before a courtroom packed with people who saw her son as a monster, she struggled to find words to capture her sorrow and guilt, expressing a haunting realization that she had lost her son not only to the prison of the justice system, but to an inner darkness that had erased any trace of the loving child she had once known. Her plea to the court was firm and heart-wrenching. She asked them to sentence Ranakorn to the fullest extent of the law, understanding that his descent into addiction and anger had stripped him of his humanity. This was not an attempt to excuse or absolve his actions, but an anguished acknowledgement of the pain her son had caused and the tragic path he had chosen. Her closing words lingered in the air, a question left hanging. How could the boy she once knew have committed such a monstrous act? How had he become a person capable of inflicting such suffering? Her statement ended in silence, broken only by her quiet sobs as she exited the courtroom, leaving behind an unforgettable impression on those present. Ranakorn's reaction to his mother's heartfelt plea was chillingly devoid of emotion. As she poured out her anguish, he sat unmoved, his eyes fixed forward, showing no sign of guilt or remorse. His silence only deepened the sense of his alienation, a disconnect so profound it shocked even those accustomed to hardened criminals. He refused to acknowledge his mother's suffering, nor did he offer any words to Miriam's family. The court and observers alike were left grappling with his unfeeling demeanor, unable to comprehend the void that lay behind his empty stare. Miriam's family, coping with unimaginable pain, chose to create something positive out of this tragedy to honor her memory. Back in Hanover, her family and university rallied to ensure her legacy endured. Hanover University announced a scholarship in her name, designed to support young engineering students who, like Miriam, possessed a passion for learning, exploration, and making meaningful contributions to the world. Through this scholarship, Miriam's spirit would continue to inspire, living on in the dreams and ambitions of future engineers. Her story ignited a wider conversation about traveler safety and accountability. sparking changes in both travel guidelines and community awareness on islands like Si Chang. In Thailand, too, discussions began about the responsibilities that both tourists and locals have in cultivating environments where respect, safety, and trust prevail. For many, the sentence was seen as a necessary step toward healing, a recognition of the profound sorrow felt by Miriam's family and the shockwaves that had rocked Si Chang's peaceful community. In the months following the trial, the impact of Miriam's story continued to resonate. Her university held a memorial in her honor, where her professors and classmates shared memories of her vibrant personality, determination, and kindness. Friends and family in Hanover spoke of Miriam not only as an accomplished young woman, but as someone whose empathy and compassion had touched the lives of many. In Thailand, too, Miriam's legacy took root in a way that went beyond her tragic fate. Initiatives were launched to improve safety measures for tourists, with increased resources for patrolling isolated areas and enhanced travel advisories for foreign visitors. Locals were encouraged to foster a greater sense of community vigilance, ensuring that the beauty of Si Chang could be appreciated in safety. As the trial reached its final stages, the court prepared to deliver a verdict, guided by overwhelming evidence that left no room for mercy. Just 3 months after Miriam's tragic death, the court issued its decision. Ranakorn was sentenced to capital punishment, a harsh verdict that mirrored the severity of his crime and the public outcry.
Today we are going to look at a disturbing case. From the outside, the Inman family seemed like the epitome of perfection. Every Sunday, they attended church together, demonstrating exemplary piety. However, few people in their circle could imagine the secrets hidden behind the closed doors of this respected household. The story of William and Sandra began back in 1983 when they first met at church. He was 18 and she was only 16. With their parents' blessing, the young couple soon got married and settled in the small town of Logan, Ohio. Bill Inman considered himself a deeply religious man. Working as a builder, he dedicated his free time to serving at the Evangelical Church of the Tabernacle of Faith, located near Nelson Villa. There, Bill played musical instruments while Sandra, being a housewife, supported her husband in his spiritual pursuits. In 1984, the couple welcomed their firstborn, a son named William Jr. To avoid confusion, the church community called the father Bill and the son Will. As the years flew by, Will gradually grew up. In 2001, when he turned 17, he met 15-year-old Summer Cook during a church service. The circumstances of their meeting remarkably resembled the love story of Bill and Sandra. The young couple dated for 3 years, and when Summer reached adulthood in 2004, they got married. The newlyweds immediately moved in with Will's parents in their spacious house in Logan. That same year, 39-year-old Bill Inman proclaimed himself a spiritual leader. He transformed his garage into a makeshift church and began holding services there. Despite the skepticism of local residents towards the self-proclaimed pastor, his mysterious home church gradually began attracting parishioners. First neighbors and then their acquaintances, people came to pray, find solace, and leave donations. In 2005, Will and Summer became happy parents of a boy named Alex. However, along with the joys of parenthood, the young couple faced financial difficulties. Bill's church activities did not bring in substantial income, so the family decided to try their luck in another state in search of a better life. The Inmans moved to Florida in 2006. In their new location, Bill and Will quickly found work in the construction industry building hotels. Meanwhile, Sandra and Summer took care of the home and raised little Alex. However, after just 2 years longing for their hometown, the family returned to Ohio. Unfortunately, during their absence, they had lost the right to buy back their previous house in Logan. They had to rent another place in the rural area of Vinton. Almost immediately after returning in 2008, Will and Summer became parents again. This time they had a daughter named Kay. 2 years later, the couple's third child, a girl named Alana, was born. Despite the challenges of raising young children, the young parents tried to set aside time for themselves. Almost every weekend, they left the kids under the care of Bill and Sandra, who gladly took on the roles of grandmother and grandfather. For the elderly couple, their grandchildren became the true meaning of life. In the spring of 2010, Bill Inman officially became a pastor, heading the Church of the Tabernacle of Faith. Together with his wife, he also founded a charitable organization called Ranch of Mercy, aiming to help the underprivileged, those who had lost their jobs or homes. Bill dreamed of building a large shelter for orphans and widows with his own hands. However, there was a lack of funds to realize this plan. That's when Bill came up with the idea of holding a lottery by selling tickets for $10 each. He hoped to raise the necessary amount. The lucky winner would receive a new house or $200,000. Additionally, Bill promised to raffle off 99 other valuable prizes. Information about the lottery was disseminated through local media and advertising. Bill personally went door to door, urging people to join the good cause and purchase tickets. He assured that the proceeds would go towards building a shelter for the needy. In total, Inman managed to sell 100,000 tickets and raise $1 million. The prize draw was scheduled for September 2010. While Bill was engaged in charity work, problems were brewing in the Inman's personal life. In June 2010, Summer confessed to her husband that she wanted a divorce after 6 years of marriage. Shortly before this, she made a bitter entry in her diary. "I'm so tired of pleasing everyone, so exhausted. Don't I deserve happiness? Don't I have the right to fall in love again and feel loved in return? Maybe it's not the best time, but I have to tell Will the truth. He needs to know that I don't want to be with him anymore. I need to be alone, figure myself out, understand who I really am. Because right now, I'm just a slave who follows orders. I love my children endlessly and wouldn't trade them for anything. But I don't want them to see their mother simply obeying someone else's will. I don't know how Will is going to react to this. Maybe he'll get furious, try to take the kids and run away, or start threatening, hurting me. I think we should have equal time with the children. I know his parents will be against it and will try to convince me to stay, but I understand that it won't change anything. Yesterday, Will asked me what I want, and I couldn't answer because I only know what I don't want. To be unhappy, to feel trapped. But I remain silent. Every day, all I can do is cry and sleep. Nothing more. I just don't know how to get out of this situation and make everything all right. I hope that the next time I write here, I'll have found the answer." Summer filed for divorce and moved out of the Inman's house with the children and essential belongings to her parents' home. She didn't want to deprive Alex, Kay, and Alana of communication with their father, so she allowed them to see Will and his parents. 2 months after leaving her husband, Summer started a romance with Adam Peters. At the same time, she got a job as a cleaner at a bank located in the center of Logan. The woman had no education, so she couldn't find other work. Meanwhile, September and October passed, but the house lottery promised by Bill from Ranch of Mercy never took place. Moreover, it turned out that the construction of the prize house hadn't even begun. The organization was in no hurry to return people's money for the tickets. In early December 2010, the Inmans were informed about the need to vacate their rented housing due to debt. Upon learning this, Summer came with Adam to pick up the belongings that were left there. However, Will and his parents didn't let their former daughter-in-law in. Summer called the police and complained that her husband, whom she was divorcing, was threatening her and wouldn't give back her personal belongings. When law enforcement arrived, Will continued to refuse to let anyone into the house, threatened to shoot Adam, and even got into a fight with a police officer. In her statement, Summer said that before the wedding, she and Will had an ideal relationship. But after getting married, he changed abruptly, started controlling her every step, being jealous and making groundless accusations. He dictated to his wife what to do and when, interfering in the most intimate areas of life, eating habits, household chores, even sexual relations. Summer couldn't even get enough sleep without her husband's permission. He effectively kept her under house arrest, forbidding her to leave the home. He hid her mobile phone and keys. The woman admitted that Will dreamed of having 12 children with her, and even planned to take a second wife. He could often be seen on websites for polygamous families, where he posted his explicit photos. Will threatened to cause harm Summer if she dared to leave him. Once, he even took her beloved cats, drove them somewhere, and then lied that they had escaped through an open window. He laughed, saying she would never see them again. After his wife's accusations, Will tried to justify himself. He claimed he took away her phone and keys because he suspected her of cheating. As for the cats, he simply took them to a shelter because they were scratching the furniture and attacking family members. Will was prohibited from approaching Summer and was sentenced to a fine and probation. At the same time, a custody battle erupted between the two families. The Inmans filed a police report, accusing Adam Peters of being dangerous to Alex, Kay, and Alana. A terrifying event occurred late in the evening of March 22, 2011. 25-year-old Summer was finishing her shift at the bank as usual. She cleaned up the workspaces and went outside around 11:15 p.m. to take out the trash. Before that, Summer had sent a message to Adam, whom she was supposed to meet after work, but he never saw his beloved again. Worried, Adam went to the bank after midnight. He didn't find Summer, but near the dumpster he saw her belongings: her phone, keys, a running player with headphones. A little further in the bushes lay her jacket. Adam called the police and informed Summer's parents about her disappearance. At first, the family thought the woman might have been delayed at work or lost her personal items, but the bank's security service assured them they hadn't seen her after the end of her shift. When law enforcement arrived at the scene, several witnesses were already waiting. 2 women who were out for a jog at the time said that they had witnessed Summer being abducted by unknown individuals an hour earlier. According to them, when the woman approached the dumpster, a white Ford Crown Victoria driven by a blonde pulled up. 2 men in black balaclavas jumped out of the car, grabbed Summer, and forcibly pushed her into the back seat. The victim resisted, screamed, and begged for help. One of the witnesses tried to intervene, but the female driver sprayed pepper spray in his face. After that, the kidnappers fled with Summer. The women immediately ran to the nearest police station and reported what they had seen. However, for some reason, law enforcement treated their statement with skepticism, even suspicion. They decided that the witnesses had made up this story for fun. A whole hour passed after Summer's parents contacted the police before they finally arrived at the crime scene. Unfortunately, it was too late. The missing woman could not be found while the trail was still hot. News of the abduction of 25-year-old Summer Inman instantly spread through the local media. Hundreds of concerned residents of Logan rallied to help with the search. But days passed, and hope of finding the woman alive faded. The parents of the missing tried not to think about the worst. A few weeks before the tragedy, Summer had posted a photo on Facebook with Adam and the children in it. They looked like a happy family. Seeing this photo on Adam's page, Will Inman became genuinely enraged. There had long been a quiet confrontation between these 2 men. It turned out that Summer had met Adam even before deciding to divorce her husband. In the spring of 2010, Peters got a job working for the Inmans, taking care of their house and yard. That's where he fell for Summer. Initially, the woman rejected Adam's advances, but eventually gave in. In her diary, there is an entry. When our eyes met, I realized that the devil had taken hold of me. I didn't listen to the voice of God. I tried to stop myself. My mind screamed, "Run, get out of here now," but I stayed and allowed Adam to embrace me and then delve deeper. I regret it. I am guilty. Meeting Adam was the beginning of the end for Summer and Will's marriage. The woman realized that she wanted to be happy, to love and be loved, so she filed for divorce. 5 days before Summer's disappearance, Will tried to challenge the amount of alimony in court. He didn't want to pay his ex-wife $150 per child every month and asked to reduce the amount to $50. After all, at that time, his annual income was only $6,500 a month. Will, along with his parents, fought for sole custody of the children, but the judge rejected their demands. Bill and Sandra missed their grandchildren very much, as they were the meaning of their lives. After parting with Summer, the elderly couple had noticeably lost weight and become haggard. In March 2011, shortly after Summer's disappearance, the police found the Inman family. Bill, Sandra, and Will were hiding in the home of Bill's mother, a 70-year-old woman from Jackson County, Ohio. During the interrogation, all 3 unanimously assured that they were not involved in Summer's abduction. They claimed that on the night in question, they had gone to Cleveland to look at a new house. On the way, the car broke down, and they had to spend the whole night repairing it on the side of the road. They only returned home to Logan in the morning. The Inmans said that they had always treated Summer well and rarely argued with her. But ever since Adam Peters appeared in their home, a dark streak had begun. Bill, Sandra, and Will called Adam a bad person who had destroyed a once happy and strong family. The police were interested in the white Ford Crown Victoria parked near the Inman's house. They confiscated the car's GPS navigator and checked the route. It turned out that on the afternoon of March 22, when the kidnapping occurred, the car was in Logan. In the evening, at 5:30 p.m., the GPS was turned off and only turned back on the next morning, March 23, again in Logan. No evidence of the Inman's trip to Cleveland could be found. Moreover, according to telephone records, all night from March 22 to 23, the suspects were in Logan. Then, information came in that on the morning of March 23 at 7:30 a.m., Bill, Sandra, and Will were seen at a car wash. They took the car for a full interior cleaning. Summer was not with them.
It says that you will plead guilty to his murder and kidnapping. that they will recommend 9 years on a murder charge and 3 years on a kidnapping to be run consecutive for a total of 12 years. The pipe that she's inside of, anything like that?
No, it's a thing.
Like a sister? You lived that she was popped up?
Mm-hmm.
Whose idea was it to take her? To get her?
I think it was probably my idea more than anybody, because I kept on and on and on about, what.
Did you know when you kidnapped her that she was going to end up dead?
No, oh Lord, no.
Okay.
I thought I could talk to her.
Okay, so the whole thing was just to try to scare her, get some sense into her, and then that's what.
Yeah. Whenever we drove out, we drove out. Bill helped her up in the car.
Okay, I was going to say, because wouldn't she saw blue blonde driving?
No, I wasn't blue blonde. I had a,
Okay.
Yeah, it was, no.
Yeah, they saw blonde hair.
Right.
Well, let me ask you this. Bank, and who was the dumpster? And this was the alley that was now. And then it was parking behind B&B. In your mind, you didn't put on the bed.
No.
You were just going to scare her.
Well,
Try to talk.
yeah. I remember we were trying to say, things like, believe that I and it helped. It wasn't too people or something.
Okay. So, she died as a result of what Willie did to her then? Was she like screaming and yelling and making a lot of racket?
Well, she was screaming and she told me that we probably.
Well, it's all three of them.
It's mainly my fault.
Well, but he took all three of them too. Your husband and your son both held her against her will, put her in the car. They restrained her. I mean, it's all three of you. It may have been your idea to begin with, but they went right along.
Done it for me.
After that, the Inmans went to Cleveland, where they changed tires at an auto repair shop. The mechanic found it strange that Bill decided to replace almost new tires with old ones. Allegedly, he simply didn't like the previous ones. The Inmans also tried to change the appearance of the car. Bill removed the police spotlight he had once installed near the side mirror. After the arrest, Bill tried to convince his elderly mother that they were not guilty of anything, and that these trials were God's punishment. However, after several hours of interrogation, realizing that all three of them faced the death penalty, Sandra gave in. The woman confessed that it was them who had kidnapped Summer on that fateful night. The men in balaclavas were her husband, Bill, and son, Will. According to Sandra, the abduction was entirely her idea. She only wanted to scare her daughter-in-law so that she would allow Will to see the children. But everything went wrong. When Summer was pushed into the car, Will tied her hands, feet, and neck with plastic ties. The woman fought and screamed, and then suddenly fainted. Will noticed that Summer was showing no signs of life. He wanted to cut the bindings and free her. He shouted to his mother, "Mom, where's the knife? I can't find it." While the family was frantically searching for the knife, a few minutes passed. It was too late to save Summer. She had suffocated. Sandra swore they didn't want to kill their daughter-in-law, only to scare her in order to settle the custody dispute over the grandchildren, and have the opportunity to see them at least on weekends. On March 29, 2011, a week after the abduction, Sandra showed where they had hidden the body. Summer was thrown into an abandoned well on the grounds of the church the Inman family attended. The Church of the Tabernacle of Faith is located near Nelsonville, 30 miles from the bank where Summer worked. Once, Bill Inman had participated in its construction, and 28 years ago, under the arches of this temple, he and Sandra got married. When the police lifted the concrete lid of the well, a gruesome sight met their eyes. Summer lay at the bottom, her body thrown in head first. The victim was wearing the same clothes as on the last day of her life, a black t-shirt with the words, "I don't have an anger problem, I have an idiot problem." The autopsy showed that Summer had died of strangulation. There were no other injuries on her body except for marks from the plastic ties on her neck, wrists, and ankles. Sandra said that she had initially planned to throw the body into the river, but then she decided that in the church well, no one would definitely find it. The woman admitted her guilt and expressed sincere regret for what she had done. Soon, the trial took place. 49-year-old Bill and 28-year-old Will did not plead guilty to Summer's murder. They barely spoke during the hearings and avoided looking her parents in the eye. Only Sandra repented for what she had done and tried to take all the responsibility upon herself. She repeated that the abduction was her idea. Delivering her final statement, the woman begged for forgiveness from Summer's parents. Through tears, emotions were choking Sandra. But despite this, everyone understood that she sincerely regretted what had happened. "Summer was like a daughter to me," the woman sobbed. "If I could turn back time, I would never have taken this horrible step." In 2012, the court passed the sentence. Bill and Will Inman received life imprisonment without the right to early release. Sandra was sentenced to life in prison with the right to parole after 15 years. The church friends and parishioners unanimously claimed that Bill was in charge of everything in the Inman family. He was the one making the decisions. No one believed that the idea of the kidnapping belonged to Sandra. Everyone knew that Will had been a spoiled boy since childhood, with his parents indulging his every whim. The defendant herself understood that her husband and son were just as guilty as she was, but Sandra tried to take the blame until the very end, hoping to soften their fate. Alex, Kaylee, and Alana remained under the care of Summer's deceased parents for a long time. They could not explain to their grandchildren where their mother, father, grandmother, and grandfather had gone. The tragedy of the Inman family serves as a warning about how hidden anger, jealousy, and the desire to control someone else's life can lead to fatal consequences. Bill and Sandra, who were a model of piety and family values to everyone, turned out to be real tyrants to their daughter-in-law. Summer became a victim of a toxic relationship where her will and desires were suppressed, and attempts to break free cost her life. Will, raised in such a suffocating atmosphere, grew up selfish and unwilling to compromise. His obsession with the idea of getting his wife and children back at any cost ultimately turned against him. The Inman's terrible crime forever destroyed several families, deprived 3 small children of their mother, and a grandfather and grandmother of their closest person. This story is a reminder of how important it is to let go of grudges in time, respect other people's boundaries, and build relationships based on mutual trust and respect, because suppressed anger sooner or later explodes, taking away the most precious things in our lives,